Chapter 15 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. The Doctor's Will. While these events were taking place, the postmaster had hurried home to open the mysterious package and know its contents. To my dear Ursula Mirouet, daughter of my natural half-brother, Joseph Mirouet, and Dina Grolman. My dear angel, the fatherly affection I bear you, and which you have so fully justified, came not only from the promise I gave your father to take his place, but also from your resemblance to my wife, Ursula Mirouet, whose grace, intelligence, frankness, and charm you constantly recall to my mind. Your position as the daughter of a natural son of my father-in-law might invalidate all testamentary bequests made by me in your favor. "The old rascal!" cried the postmaster. Had I adopted you, the result might also have been a lawsuit, and I shrank from the idea of transmitting my fortune to you by marriage, for I might live years, and thus interfere with your happiness, which is now delayed only by Madame de Portenduère. Having weighed these difficulties carefully, and wishing to leave you enough money to secure to you a prosperous existence, the scoundrel, he has thought of everything. Without injuring my heirs, the Jesuit, as if he did not owe us every penny of his money. I intend you to have the savings from my income, which I have for the last 18 years steadily invested by the help of my notary, seeking to make you thereby as happy as anyone can be made by riches. Without means, your education and your lofty ideas would cause you unhappiness. Besides, you ought to bring a liberal dowry to the fine young man who loves you. You will, therefore, find in the middle of the 3rd volume of Pandect's folio, bound in red morocco, the last volume on the first shelf above the little table in the library, on the side of the room next the salon, 3 certificates of funds in the 3%, made out to bearer, each amounting to 12,000 francs a year. "What depths of wickedness!" screamed the postmaster. "Ah, God would not permit me to be so defrauded." Take these at once, and also some uninvested savings made to this date, which you will find in the preceding volume. Remember, my darling child, that you must obey a wish that has made the happiness of my whole life. A wish that will force me to ask the intervention of God should you disobey me. But to guard against all scruples in your dear conscience, for I well know how ready it is to torture you, you will find herewith a will, in due form, bequeathing these certificates to Monsieur Savignan de Portenduère. So, whether you possess them in your own name, or whether they come to you from him you love, they will be, in every sense, your legitimate property. Your godfather, Denis Minoret. To this letter was annexed the following paper written on a sheet of stamped paper. This is my will. I, Denis Minoret, doctor of medicine, settled in Namur, being of sound mind and body, as the date of this document will show, do bequeath my soul to God, imploring him to pardon my errors in view of my sincere repentance. Next, having found in Monsieur le Vicomte Savignan de Portenduère a true and honest affection for me, I bequeath to him the sum of 36,000 francs a year from the funds at 3%, the said bequest to take precedence of all inheritance accruing to my heirs. Written by my own hand at Namur on the 11th of January, 1831. Denis Minoret. Without an instant's hesitation, the postmaster, who had locked himself into his wife's bedroom to ensure being alone, looked about for the tinder-box, and received 2 warnings from heaven by the extinction of 2 matches, which obstinately refused to light. The third took fire. He burned the letter and the will on the hearth, and buried the vestiges of paper and sealing-wax in the ashes by way of superfluous caution. Then, allured by the thought of possessing 36,000 francs a year, of which his wife knew nothing, he returned at full speed to his uncle's house, spurred by the only idea, a clear-cut, simple idea, which was able to pierce and penetrate his dull brain. Finding the house invaded by the 3 families, now masters of the place, he trembled lest he should be unable to accomplish a project to which he gave no reflection whatever, except so far as to fear the obstacles. "What are you doing here?" he said to Masson and Crémière. "We can't leave the house and the property to be pillaged. We are the heirs, but we can't camp here. You, Crémière, go to Dionys at once and tell him to come and certify to the death. I can't draw up the mortuary certificate for an uncle, though I am assistant mayor. You, Masson, go and ask old Bongrand to attach the seals. As for you ladies," he added, turning to his wife and Mesdames Crémière and Masson, "go and look after Ursula. Then nothing can be stolen. Above all, close the iron gate and don't let anyone leave the house." The women, who felt the justice of this remark, ran to Ursula's bedroom, where they found the noble girl, so cruelly suspected, on her knees before God, her face covered with tears. Minoret, suspecting that the women would not long remain with Ursula, went at once to the library, found the volume, opened it, took the 3 certificates, and found in the other volume about 30 banknotes. In spite of his brutal nature, the Colossus felt as though a peal of bells were ringing in each ear. The blood whistled in his temples as he committed the theft. Cold as the weather was, his shirt was wet on his back, his legs gave way under him, and he fell into a chair in the salon as if an axe had fallen on his head. "How the inheritance of money loosens a man's tongue! Did you hear, Minoret?" said Masson to Crémière as they hurried through the town. "Go here, go there, just as if he knew everything." "Yes, for a dull beast like him, he had a certain air of—" "Stop," said Masson, alarmed at a sudden thought. "His wife is there. They've got some plan. Do you do both errands. I'll go back." Just as the postmaster fell into the chair, he saw at the gate the heated face of the clerk of the court, who returned to the house of death with the celerity of a weasel. "Well, what is it now?" asked the postmaster, unlocking the gate for his co-heir. "Nothing. I have come back to be present at the sealing," answered Masson, giving him a savage look. "I wish those seals were already on, so that we could go home," said Minoret. "We shall have to put a watcher over them," said Masson. "La Bougival is capable of anything in the interests of that minx. We'll put Goupil there." "Goupil?" said the postmaster. "Put a rat in the meal?" "Well, let's consider," returned Masson. "To-night they'll watch the body. The seals can be affixed in an hour. Our wives could look after them. Tomorrow we'll have the funeral at 12 o'clock. But the inventory can't be made under a week." "Let's get rid of that girl at once," said the Colossus. "Then we can safely leave the watchman of the town hall to look after the house and the seals." "Good," cried Masson. "You are the head of the Minoret family." "Ladies," said Minoret, "be good enough to stay in the salon. We can't think of our dinner today. The seals must be put on at once for the security of all interests." He took his wife apart and told her Masson's proposition about Ursula. The women, whose hearts were full of vengeance against the minx, as they called her, hailed the idea of turning her out. Bongrand arrived with his assistants to apply the seals, and was indignant when the request was made to him by Zélie and Madame Masson, as a near friend of the deceased, to tell Ursula to leave the house. "Go and turn her out of her father's house, her benefactor's house, yourselves," he cried. "Go, you who owe your inheritance to the generosity of her soul. Take her by the shoulders and fling her into the street before the eyes of the whole town. You think her capable of robbing you? Well, appoint a watcher of the seals, you have a right to do that. But I tell you at once that I shall put no seals on Ursula's room. She has a right to that room, and everything in it is her own property. I shall tell her what her rights are, and tell her, too, to put everything that belongs to her in this house in that room. Oh, in your presence," he said, hearing a growl of dissatisfaction among the heirs. "What do you think of that?" said the collector to the postmaster and the women, who seemed stupefied by the angry address of Bongrand. "Call him a magistrate!" cried the postmaster. Ursula, meanwhile, was sitting on her little sofa in a half-fainting condition, her head thrown back, her braids unfastened, while every now and then her sobs broke forth. Her eyes were dim and their lids swollen. She was, in fact, in a state of moral and physical prostration, which might have softened the hardest hearts, except those of the heirs. "Ah, Monsieur Bongrand, after my happy birthday comes death and mourning," she said, with the poetry natural to her. "You know, what he was. In 20 years he never said an impatient word to me. I believed he would live 100 years. He has been my mother," she cried, "my good, kind mother." These simple thoughts brought torrents of tears from her eyes, interrupted by sobs. Then she fell back, exhausted. "My child," said the justice of peace, hearing the heirs on the staircase, "you have a lifetime before you in which to weep, but you have now only a moment to attend to your interests. Gather everything that belongs to you in this house, and put it into your own room at once. The heirs insist on my affixing the seals." "Ah, his heirs may take everything if they choose," cried Ursula, sitting upright under an impulse of savage indignation. "I have something here," she added, striking her breast, "which is far more precious." "What is it?" said the postmaster, who, with Masson at his heels, now showed his brutal face. "The remembrances of his virtues, of his life, of his words, an image of his celestial soul," she said, her eyes and face glowing as she raised her hand with a glorious gesture. "And a key," cried Masson, creeping up to her like a cat, and seizing a key which fell from the bosom of her dress in her sudden movement. "Yes," she said, blushing. "That is the key of his study. He sent me there at the moment he was dying." The two men glanced at each other with horrid smiles, and then at Monsieur Bongrand with a meaning look of degrading suspicion. Ursula, who intercepted it, rose to her feet, pale as if the blood had left her body. Her eyes sent forth the lightnings that perhaps can issue only at some cost of life, as she said in a choking voice, "Monsieur Bongrand, everything in this room is mine through the kindness of my godfather. They may have it all. I have nothing on me but the clothes I wear. I shall leave the house and never return to it." She went to her godfather's room, and no entreaties could make her leave it. The heirs, who now began to be slightly ashamed of their conduct, endeavoring to persuade her. She requested Monsieur Bongrand to engage 2 rooms for her at the Vieille Poste Inn, until she could find some lodgings in town where she could live with la Bougival. She returned to her own room for her prayer book, and spent the night with the Abbé, his assistant, and Savinien, in weeping and praying beside her uncle's body. Savinien came after his mother had gone to bed, and knelt without a word beside his Ursula. She smiled at him sadly, and thanked him for coming faithfully to share her troubles. "My child," said Monsieur Bongrand, bringing her a large package, "one of your uncle's heirs has taken these necessary articles from your drawers, for the seals cannot be opened for several days. After that you will recover everything that belongs to you. I have, for your own sake, placed the seals on your room." "Thank you," she replied, pressing his hand. "Look at him again. He seems to sleep, does he not?" The old man's face wore that flower of fleeting beauty which rests upon the features of the dead who die a painless death. Light appeared to radiate from it. "Did he give you anything secretly before he died?" whispered Monsieur Bongrand. "Nothing," she said. "He spoke only of a letter." "Good. It will certainly be found," said Bongrand. "How fortunate for you that the heirs demanded the sealing." At daybreak Ursula bade adieu to the house where her happy youth was passed, more particularly to the modest chamber in which her love began. So dear to her was it that even in this hour of darkest grief, tears of regret rolled down her face for the dear and peaceful haven. With one last glance at Savinien's windows, she left the room and the house, and went to the inn, accompanied by la Bougival, who carried the package, by Monsieur Bongrand, who gave her his arm, and by Savinien, her true protector. Thus it happened that, in spite of all his efforts and cautions, the worst fears of the justice of peace were realized. He was now to see Ursula without means, and at the mercy of her benefactor's heirs. The next afternoon the whole town attended the doctor's funeral. When the conduct of the heirs to his adopted daughter was publicly known, a vast majority of the people thought it natural and necessary. An inheritance was involved. The good man was known to have hoarded. Ursula might think she had rights. The heirs were only defending their property. She had humbled them enough during her uncle's lifetime, for he had treated them like dogs and sent them about their business. Désiré Minoret, who was not going to do wonders in life, so said those who envied his father, came down for the funeral. Ursula was unable to be present, for she was in bed with a nervous fever, caused partly by the insults of the heirs and partly by her heavy affliction. "Look at that hypocrite weeping," said some of the heirs, pointing to Savigny, who was deeply affected by the doctor's death. "The question is," said Goupil, "has he any good grounds for weeping? Don't laugh too soon, my friends. The seals are not yet removed." "Pooh!" said Minoret, who had good reason to know the truth. "You are always frightening us about nothing." As the funeral procession left the church to proceed to the cemetery, a bitter mortification was inflicted on Goupil. He tried to take Désirée's arm, but the latter withdrew it and turned away from his former comrade in presence of all Nemours. "I won't be angry, or I couldn't get revenge," thought the notary's clerk, whose dry heart swelled in his bosom like a sponge. Before breaking the seals and making the inventory, it took some time for the Procureur du Roi, who is the legal guardian of orphans, to commission Monsieur Bongrand to act in his place. After that was done, the settlement of the Minoret inheritance, nothing else being talked of in the town for 10 days, began with all the legal formalities. Dionys had his pickings. Goupil enjoyed some mischief-making, and as the business was profitable, the sessions were many. After the first of these sessions, all parties breakfasted together. Notary, clerk, heirs and witnesses drank the best wines in the doctor's cellar. In the provinces, and especially in little towns where everyone lives in his own house, it is sometimes very difficult to find a lodging. When a man buys a business of any kind, the dwelling house is almost always included in the purchase. Monsieur Bongrand saw no other way of removing Ursula from the village inn than to buy a small house on the Grand Rue at the corner of the bridge over the Loing. The little building had a front door opening on a corridor, and one room on the ground floor with 2 windows on the street. Behind this came the kitchen, with a glass door opening to an inner courtyard about 30 feet square. A small staircase, lighted on the side towards the river by small windows, led to the first floor where there were 3 chambers, and above these were 2 attic rooms. Monsieur Bongrand borrowed 2,000 francs from la Bougival's savings to pay the first installment of the price, 6,000 francs, and obtained good terms for the payment of the rest. As Ursula wished to buy her uncle's books, Bongrand knocked down the partition between 2 rooms on the bedroom floor, finding that their united length was the same as that of the doctor's library, and gave room for his bookshelves. Savigny and Bongrand urged on the workmen who were cleaning, painting, and otherwise renewing the tiny place, so that before the end of March, Ursula was able to leave the inn and take up her abode in the ugly house, where, however, she found a bedroom exactly like the one she had left, for it was filled with all her furniture, claimed by the justice of peace when the seals were removed. La Bougival, sleeping in the attic, could be summoned by a bell placed near the head of the young girl's bed. The room intended for the books, the salon on the ground floor, and the kitchen, though still unfurnished, had been hung with fresh papers and repainted, and only awaited the purchases which the young girl hoped to make when her godfather's effects were sold. Though the strength of Ursula's character was well known to the Abbé and Monsieur Bongrand, they both feared the sudden change from the comfort and elegancies to which her uncle had accustomed her, to this barren and denuded life. As for Savigny, he wept over it. He did, in fact, make private payments to the workmen and to the upholsterer, so that Ursula should perceive no difference between the new chamber and the old one. But the young girl herself, whose happiness now lay in Savagnin's own eyes, showed the gentlest resignation, which endeared her more and more to her two old friends, and proved to them, for the 100th time, that no troubles but those of the heart could make her suffer. The grief she felt for the loss of her godfather was far too deep to let her even feel the bitterness of her change of fortune, though it added fresh obstacles to her marriage. Savagnin's distress in seeing her thus reduced did her so much harm that she whispered to him as they came from Mass on the day when she first went to live in her new house, "Love could not exist without patience. Let us wait." As soon as the form of the inventory was drawn up, Massin, advised by Goupil, who turned to him under the influence of his secret hatred to the postmaster, summoned Monsieur and Madame de Portenduère to pay off the mortgage, which had now elapsed, together with the interest accruing thereon. The old lady was bewildered at a summons to pay 129,517 francs within 24 hours, under pain of execution on her house. It was impossible for her to borrow the money. Savagnin went to Fontainebleau to consult a lawyer. "You are dealing with a bad set of people who will not compromise," was the lawyer's opinion. "They intend to sue in the matter and get your farm at Bordière. The best way for you would be to make a voluntary sale of it, and so escape costs." This dreadful news broke down the old lady. Her son very gently pointed out to her that had she consented to his marriage in Minoret's lifetime, the doctor would have left his property to Ursula's husband, and they would today have been opulent, instead of being, as they now were, in the depths of poverty. Though said without reproach, this argument annihilated the poor woman even more than the thought of her coming ejectment. When Ursula heard of this catastrophe, she was stupefied with grief, having scarcely recovered from her fever and the blow which the heirs had already dealt her. To love and be unable to succor the man she loves, that is one of the most dreadful of all sufferings to the soul of a noble and sensitive woman. "I wished to buy my uncle's house," she said. "Now I will buy your mother's." "Can you?" said Savagnin. "You are a minor, and you cannot sell out your funds without formalities, to which the Procureur du Roi, now your legal guardian, would not agree. We shall not resist. The whole town will be glad to see the discomfiture of a noble family. These bourgeois are like hounds after a quarry. Fortunately, I still have 10,000 francs left, on which I can support my mother till this deplorable matter is settled. Besides, the inventory of your godfather's property is not yet finished. Monsieur Bongrand still thinks he shall find something for you. He is as much astonished as I am that you seem to be left without fortune. The doctor so often spoke, both to him and to me, of the future he had prepared for you, that neither of us can understand this conclusion." "Pooh!" she said. "So long as I can buy my godfather's books and furniture, and prevent their being dispersed, I am content." "But who knows the price these infamous creatures will set on anything you want?" Nothing was talked of from Montargis to Fontainebleau but the million for which the Minoret heirs were searching. But the most minute search made in every corner of the house after the seals were removed brought no discovery. The 129,000 francs of the Potentioire debt, the capital of the 15,000 a year in the 3%, then quoted at 76, the house, valued at 40,000 francs, and its handsome furniture, produced a total of about 600,000 francs, which to most persons seemed a comforting sum. But what had become of the money the doctor must have saved? Minoret began to have gnawing anxieties. La Bougival and Savagnin, who persisted in believing, as did the justice of peace, in the existence of a will, came every day at the close of each session to find out from Bongrand the results of the day's search. The latter would sometimes exclaim, before the agents and the heirs were fairly out of hearing, "I can't understand the thing." Bongrand, Savagnin, and the Abbé often declared to each other that the doctor, who received no interest from the Potentioire loan, could not have kept his house as he did on 15,000 francs a year. This opinion, openly expressed, made the postmaster turn livid more than once. "Yet they and I have rummaged everywhere," said Bongrand. "They to find money, and I to find a will in favor of Monsieur de Potentioire. They have sifted the ashes, lifted the marbles, felt of the slippers, bored into the woodwork of the beds, emptied the mattresses, ripped up the quilts, turned his eiderdown inside out, examined every inch of paper piece by piece, searched the drawers, dug up the cellar floor, and I have urged on their devastations." "What do you think about it?" said the Abbé. "The will has been suppressed by one of the heirs." "But where's the property?" "We may whistle for it." "Perhaps the will is hidden in the library," said Savagnin. "Yes, and for that reason I don't dissuade Ursula from buying it. If it were not for that, it would be absurd to let her put every penny of her ready money into books she will never open." At first the whole town believed the doctor's niece had got possession of the unfound capital, but when it was known positively that 1,400 francs a year and her gifts constituted her whole fortune, the search of the doctor's house and furniture excited a more widespread curiosity than before. Some said the money would be found in bank bills hidden away in the furniture. Others, that the old man had slipped them into his books. The sale of the effects exhibited a spectacle of the most extraordinary precautions on the part of the heirs. Dionys, who was doing duty as auctioneer, declared, as each lot was cried out, that the heirs only sold the article, whatever it was, and not what it might contain. Then, before allowing it to be taken away, it was subjected to a final investigation, being thumped and sounded, and when at last it left the house, the sellers followed with the looks a father might cast upon a son who was starting for India. "Ah, mademoiselle," cried La Bougival, returning from the first session in despair, "I shall not go again. Monsieur Bongrand is right. You could never bear the sight. Everything is ticketed. All the town is coming and going, just as in the street. The handsome furniture is being ruined. They even stand upon it. The whole place is such a muddle that a hen couldn't find her chicks. You'd think there had been a fire. Lots of things are in the courtyard. The closets are all open and nothing in them. Oh, the poor dear man. It's well he died. The sight would have killed him." Bongrand, who bought for Ursula certain articles which her uncle cherished, and which were suitable for her little house, did not appear at the sale of the library. Shrewder than the heirs, whose cupidity might have run up the price of the books had they known he was buying them for Ursula, he commissioned a dealer in old books living in Melun to buy them for him. As a result of the heir's anxiety, the whole library was sold book by book. 3,000 volumes were examined one by one, held by the two sides of the binding and shaken so that loose papers would infallibly fall out. The whole amount of the purchases on Ursula's account amounted to 6,500 francs or thereabouts. The bookcases were not allowed to leave the premises until carefully examined by a cabinet maker brought down from Paris to search for secret drawers. When at last Monsieur Bongrand gave orders to take the books and the bookcases to Mademoiselle Mirouet's house, the heirs were tortured with vague fears, not dissipated until, in course of time, they saw how poorly she lived. Minoret bought up his uncle's house, the value of which his co-heirs ran up to 50,000 francs, imagining that the postmaster expected to find a treasure in the walls. In fact, the house was sold with a reservation on this subject. 2 weeks later, Minoret disposed of his post establishment, with all the coaches and horses, to the son of a rich farmer, and went to live in his uncle's house, where he spent considerable sums in repairing and refurnishing the rooms. By making this move, he thoughtlessly condemned himself to live within sight of Ursula. "I hope," he said to Dionys the day when Madame de Portenduère was summoned to pay her debt, "that we shall soon be rid of those nobles. After they are gone, we'll drive out the rest." "That old woman with 14 quarterings," said Goupil, "won't want to witness her own disaster. She'll go and die in Brittany, where she can manage to find a wife for her son." "No," said the notary, who had that morning drawn out a deed of sale at Bongrand's request. "Ursula has just bought the house she is living in." "That cursed fool does everything she can to annoy me," cried the postmaster, imprudently. "What does it signify to you whether she lives in Nemours or not?" asked Goupil, surprised at the annoyance which the colossus betrayed. "Don't you know," answered Minoret, turning as red as a poppy, "that my son is fool enough to be in love with her? I'd give 500 francs if I could get Ursula out of this town." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. The Two Adversaries. Perhaps the foregoing conduct on the part of the postmaster will have shown already that Ursula, poor and resigned, was destined to be a thorn in the side of the rich Minoret. The bustle attending the settlement of an estate, the sale of the property, the going and coming necessitated by such unusual business, his discussions with his wife about the most trifling details, the purchase of the doctor's house, where Zélie wished to live in bourgeois style to advance her son's interests, all this hurly-burly, contrasting with his usually tranquil life, hindered the huge Minoret from thinking of his victim. But about the middle of May, a few days after his installation in the doctor's house, as he was coming home from a walk, he heard the sound of a piano, saw La Bougival sitting at a window, like a dragon guarding a treasure, and suddenly became aware of an importunate voice within him. To explain why, to a man of Minoret's nature, the sight of Ursula, who had no suspicion of the theft committed upon her, now became intolerable, why the spectacle of so much fortitude under misfortune impelled him to a desire to drive the girl out of town, and how and why it was that this desire took the form of hatred and revenge, would require a whole treatise on moral philosophy. Perhaps he felt he was not the real possessor of 36,000 francs a year, so long as she to whom they really belonged lived near him. Perhaps he fancied some mere chance might betray his theft, if the person despoiled was not got rid of. Perhaps, to a nature in some sort primitive, almost uncivilized, and whose owner up to that time had never done anything illegal, the presence of Ursula awakened remorse. Possibly this remorse goaded him the more because he had received his share of the property legitimately acquired. In his own mind he no doubt attributed these stirrings of his conscience to the fact of Ursula's presence, imagining that if she were removed, all his uncomfortable feelings would disappear with her. But still, after all, perhaps crime has its own doctrine of perfection. A beginning of evil demands its end. A first stab must be followed by the blow that kills. Perhaps robbery is doomed to lead to murder. Minoret had committed the crime without the slightest reflection. So rapidly had the events taken place. Reflection came later. Now, if you have thoroughly possessed yourself of this man's nature and bodily presence, you will understand the mighty effect produced on him by a thought. Remorse is more than a thought. It comes from a feeling which can no more be hidden than love. Like love, it has its own tyranny. But, just as Minoret had committed the crime against Ursula without the slightest reflection, so he now blindly longed to drive her from Nemours when he felt himself disturbed by the sight of that wronged innocence. Being, in a sense, imbecile, he never thought of the consequences. He went from danger to danger, driven by a selfish instinct, like a wild animal which does not foresee the huntsman's skill and relies on its own rapidity or strength. Before long, the rich bourgeois who still met in Dionys's salon noticed a great change in the manners and behavior of the man who had hitherto been so free of care. "I don't know what has come to Minoret. He is all know-how," said his wife, from whom he was resolved to hide his daring deed. Everybody explained his condition as being, neither more nor less, ennui. In fact, the thought now expressed on his face did resemble ennui, caused, they said, by the sudden cessation of business and the change from an active life to one of well-to-do leisure. While Minoret was thinking only of destroying Ursula's life in Nemours, La Bougival never let a day go by without torturing her foster child with some allusion to the fortune she ought to have had, or without comparing her miserable lot with the prospects the doctor had promised, and of which he had often spoken to her, La Bougival. "It is not for myself I speak," she said, "but is it likely that monsieur, good and kind as he was, would have died without leaving me the merest trifle?" "Am I not here?" replied Ursula, forbidding La Bougival to say another word on the subject. She could not endure to soil the dear and tender memories that surrounded that noble head, a sketch of which, in black and white, hung in her little salon, with thoughts of selfish interest. To her fresh and beautiful imagination, that sketch sufficed to make her see her godfather, on whom her thoughts continually dwelt, all the more because surrounded with the things he loved and used, his large Duchess sofa, the furniture from his study, his backgammon table, and the piano he had chosen for her. The two old friends who still remained to her, the Abbé Chaperon and Monsieur Bongrand, the only visitors whom she received, were, in the midst of these inanimate objects, representative of the past, like two living memories of her former life, to which she attached her present by the love her godfather had blessed. After a while, the sadness of her thoughts, softening gradually, gave tone to the general tenor of her life, and united all its parts in an indefinable harmony, expressed by the exquisite neatness, the exact symmetry of her room, the few flowers sent by Savigny, the dainty nothings of a young girl's life, the tranquillity which her quiet habits diffused about her, giving peace and composure to the little home. After breakfast and after Mass, she continued her studies and practised. Then she took her embroidery and sat at the window looking on the street. At 4 o'clock, Savigny, returning from a walk, which he took in all weathers, finding the window open, would sit upon the outer casing and talk with her for half an hour. In the evening the Abbé and Monsieur Bongrand came to see her, but she never allowed Savigny to accompany them. Neither did she accept Madame de Portenduere's proposition, which Savigny had induced his mother to make, that she should visit there. Ursula and La Bougival lived, moreover, with the strictest economy. They did not spend, counting everything, more than 60 francs a month. The old nurse was indefatigable. She washed and ironed, cooked only twice a week, mistress and maid eating their food cold on other days, for Ursula was determined to save the 700 francs still due on the purchase of the house. This rigid conduct, together with her modesty and her resignation to a life of poverty, after the enjoyment of luxury and the fond indulgence of all her wishes, deeply impressed certain persons. Ursula won the respect of others, and no voice was raised against her. Even the heirs, once satisfied, did her justice. Savigny admired the strength of character of so young a girl. From time to time, Madame de Portenduere, when they met in church, would address a few kind words to her, and twice she insisted on her coming to dinner and fetched her herself. If all this was not happiness, it was at least tranquillity. But a benefit which came to Ursula through the legal care and ability of Bongrand started the smouldering persecution which up to this time had laid in Minoret's breast as a dumb desire. As soon as the legal settlement of the doctor's estate was finished, the justice of peace, urged by Ursula, took the cause of the Portendueres in hand and promised her to get them out of their trouble. In dealing with the old lady, whose opposition to Ursula's happiness made him furious, he did not allow her to be ignorant of the fact that his devotion to her service was solely to give pleasure to Mademoiselle Mirouet. He chose one of his former clerks to act for the Portendueres at Fontainebleau, and himself put in a motion for a stay of proceedings. He intended to profit by the interval which must elapse between the stoppage of the present suit and some new step on the part of Massin, to renew the lease at 6,000 francs, get a premium from the present tenants, and the payment in full of the rent of the current year. At this time, when these matters had to be discussed, the former whist parties were again organized in Madame de Portenduer's salon, between himself, the Abbé, Savigny, and Ursula, whom the Abbé and he escorted there and back every evening. In June, Bongrand succeeded in quashing the proceedings, whereupon the new lease was signed. He obtained a premium of 32,000 francs from the farmer, and a rent of 6,000 a year for 18 years. The evening of the day on which this was finally settled, he went to see Zélie, whom he knew to be puzzled as to how to invest her money, and proposed to sell her the farm at Bordière for 220,000 francs. "I'd buy it at once," said Minoret, "if I were sure the Portenduers would go and live somewhere else." "Why?" said the justice of peace. "We want to get rid of the nobles in Nemours." "I did hear the old lady say that if she could settle her affairs, she should go and live in Brittany, as she would not have means enough left to live here. She is thinking of selling her house." "Well, sell it to me," said Minoret. "To you?" said Zélie. "You talk as if you were master of everything. What do you want with 2 houses in Nemours?" "If I don't settle this matter of the farm with you tonight," said Bongrand, "our lease will get known. Massin will put in a fresh claim, and I shall lose this chance of liquidation, which I am anxious to make. So if you don't take my offer, I shall go at once to Melun, where some farmers I know are ready to buy the farm with their eyes shut." "Why did you come to us, then?" said Zélie. "Because you can pay me in cash, and my other clients would make me wait some time for the money. I don't want difficulties." "Get her out of Nemours, and I'll pay it," exclaimed Minoret. "You understand that I cannot answer for Madame de Portenduer's actions," said Bongrand. "I can only repeat what I heard her say, but I feel certain they will not remain in Nemours." On this assurance, and forced by a nudge from Zélie, Minoret agreed to the purchase, and furnished the funds to pay off the mortgage due to the doctor's estate. The deed of sale was immediately drawn up by Dionis. Towards the end of June, Bongrand brought the balance of the purchase money to Madame de Portenduer, advising her to invest it in the funds, where, joined by Savigny's 10,000, it would give her, at 5%, an income of 6,000 francs. Thus, so far from losing her resources, the old lady actually gained by the transaction. But she did not leave Nemours. Minoret thought he had been tricked, as though Bongrand had had an idea that Ursula's presence was intolerable to him, and he felt a keen resentment which embittered his hatred to his victim. Then began a secret drama which was terrible in its effects, the struggle of 2 determinations. One, which impelled Minoret to drive his victim from Nemours; the other, which gave Ursula the strength to bear persecution, the cause of which was for a certain length of time undiscoverable. The situation was a strange and even unnatural one, and yet it was led up to by all the preceding events, which served as a preface to what was now to occur. Madame Minoret, to whom her husband had given a handsome silver service costing 20,000 francs, gave a magnificent dinner every Sunday, the day on which her son, the deputy procureur, came from Fontainebleau, bringing with him certain of his friends. On these occasions Zélie sent to Paris for delicacies, obliging Dionys, the notary, to emulate her display. Goupil, whom the Minorets endeavored to ignore as a questionable person who might tarnish their splendor, was not invited until the end of July. The clerk, who was fully aware of this intended neglect, was forced to be respectful to Désiré, who, since his entrance into office, had assumed a haughty and dignified air, even to his own family. "You must have forgotten Esther," Goupil said to him, "as you are so much in love with Mademoiselle Mirouet." "In the first place, Esther is dead, monsieur, and in the next, I have never even thought of Ursula," said the new magistrate. "Why, what did you tell me, Papa Minoret?" cried Goupil insolently. Minoret, caught in a lie by a man whom he feared, would have lost countenance if it had not been for a project in his head, which was, in fact, the reason why Goupil was invited to dinner. Minoret having remembered the proposition the clerk had once made to prevent the marriage between Sévigné and Ursula. For all answer, he led Goupil hurriedly to the end of the garden. "You'll soon be 28 years old, my good fellow," said he, "and I don't see that you are on the road to fortune. I wish you well, for after all you were once my son's companion. Listen to me. If you can persuade that little Mirouet, who possesses in her own right 40,000 francs, to marry you, I will give you, as true as my name is Minoret, the means to buy a notary's practice at Orléans." "No," said Goupil, "that's too far out of the way. But Montargis—" "No," said Minoret, "Sens." "Very good, Sens," replied the hideous clerk. "There's an archbishop at Sens, and I don't object to devotion. A little hypocrisy, and there you are, on the way to fortune. Besides, the girl is pious, and she'll succeed at Sens." "It is to be fully understood," continued Minoret, "that I shall not pay the money till you marry my cousin, for whom I wish to provide out of consideration for my deceased uncle." "Why not for me, too?" said Goupil maliciously, instantly suspecting a secret motive in Minoret's conduct. "Isn't it through information you got from me that you make 24,000 a year from that land, without a single enclosure, around the Chateau du Rouvre? The fields and the mill the other side of the Lorraine make 16,000 more. Come, old fellow, do you mean to play fair with me?" "Yes." "If I wanted to show my teeth, I could coax Masson to buy the Rouvre estate, park, gardens, preserves, and timber." "You'd better think twice before you do that," said Zélie, suddenly intervening. "If I choose," said Goupil, giving her a viperish look, "Masson would buy the whole for 200,000 francs." "Leave us, wife," said the Colossus, taking Zélie by the arm and shoving her away. "I understand him. We have been so very busy," he continued, returning to Goupil, "that we have had no time to think of you. But I rely on your friendship to buy the Rouvre estate for me." "It is a very ancient marquisate," said Goupil maliciously, "which will soon be worth in your hands 50,000 francs a year. That means a capital of more than 2 millions, as money is now." My son could then marry the daughter of a marshal of France, or the daughter of some old family whose influence would get him a fine place under the government in Paris," said Minoret, opening his huge snuff-box and offering a pinch to Goupil. "Very good, but will you play fair?" cried Goupil, shaking his fingers. Minoret pressed the clerk's hands, replying, "On my word of honor." End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. The malignity of provincial minds. Like all crafty persons, Goupil, fortunately for Minoret, believed that the proposed marriage with Ursula was only a pretext on the part of the Colossus and Zélie for making up with him, now that he was opposing them with Massin. "It isn't he," thought Goupil, "who has invented this scheme. I know my Zélie. She taught him his part. Bah! I'll let Massin go. In 3 years' time I'll be deputy from Sens." Just then he saw Bongrand on his way to the opposite house for his whist, and he rushed hastily after him. "You take a great interest in Mademoiselle Mirouet, my dear Monsieur Bongrand," he said. "I know you will not be indifferent to her future. Her relations are considering it, and there is the programme. She ought to marry a notary whose practice should be in the chief town of an arrondissement. This notary, who would of course be elected deputy in 3 years, should settle a dower of 100,000 francs on her." "She can do better than that," said Bongrand coldly. "Madame de Portenduère is greatly changed since her misfortunes. Trouble is killing her. Savignan will have 6,000 francs a year, and Ursula has a capital of 40,000. I shall show them how to increase it à la Massin, but honestly, and in 10 years they will have a little fortune." "Savignan will do a foolish thing," said Goupil. "He can marry Mademoiselle du Rouvre whenever he likes, an only daughter to whom the uncle and aunt intend to leave a fine property." "Where love enters, farewell prudence, as La Fontaine says. By the by, who is your notary?" asked Bongrand from curiosity. "Suppose it were I," answered Goupil. "You!" exclaimed Bongrand, without hiding his disgust. "Well, well, adieu, monsieur," replied Goupil, with a parting glance of gall and hatred and defiance. "Do you wish to be the wife of a notary who will settle 100,000 francs on you?" cried Bongrand, entering Madame de Portenduère's little salon, where Ursula was seated beside the old lady. Ursula and Savignan trembled and looked at each other, she smiling, he not daring to show his uneasiness. "I am not mistress of myself," said Ursula, holding out her hand to Savignan in such a way that the old lady did not perceive the gesture. "Well, I have refused the offer without consulting you." "Why did you do that?" said Madame de Portenduère. "I think the position of a notary is a very good one." "I prefer my peaceful poverty," said Ursula, "which is really wealth compared with what my station in life might have given me. Besides, my old nurse spares me a great deal of care, and I shall not exchange the present, which I like, for an unknown fate." A few weeks later, the post poured into 2 hearts the poison of anonymous letters, one addressed to Madame de Portenduère, the other to Ursula. The following is the one to the old lady. You love your son, you wish to marry him in a manner conformable with the name he bears, and yet you encourage his fancy for an ambitious girl, without money, and the daughter of a regimental bandmaster, by inviting her to your house. You ought to marry him to Mademoiselle de Rouvre, on whom her two uncles, the Marquis de Ronquerolles and the Chevalier de Rouvre, who are worth money, would settle a handsome sum rather than leave it to that old fool, the Marquis de Rouvre, who runs through everything. Madame de Serizy, aunt of Clémentine de Rouvre, who has just lost her only son in the campaign in Algiers, will no doubt adopt her niece. A person who is your well-wisher assures you that Savinien will be accepted. The letter to Ursula was as follows. Dear Ursula, there is a young man in Namur who idolizes you. He cannot see you working at your window without emotions which prove to him that his love will last through life. This young man is gifted with an iron will and a spirit of perseverance which nothing can discourage. Receive his addresses favorably, for his intentions are pure, and he humbly asks your hand with a sincere desire to make you happy. His fortune, already suitable, is nothing to that which he will make for you when you are once his wife. You shall be received at court as the wife of a minister and one of the first ladies in the land. As he sees you every day without your being able to see him, put a pot of La Bougival's pinks in your window, and he will understand from that he has your permission to present himself. Ursula burned the letter and said nothing about it to Savinien. 2 days later, she received another letter in the following language. You do wrong, my dear Ursula, not to answer one who loves you better than life itself. You think you will marry Savinien. You are very much mistaken. That marriage will not take place. Madame de Portenduère went this morning to Rouvre to ask for the hand of Mademoiselle Clémentine for her son. Savinien will yield in the end. What objection can he make? The uncles of the young lady are willing to guarantee their fortune to her. It amounts to over 60,000 francs a year. This letter agonized Ursula's heart and afflicted her with the tortures of jealousy, a form of suffering hitherto unknown to her, but which, to this fine organization so sensitive to pain, threw a pall over the present and over the future, and even over the past. From the moment when she received this fatal paper, she lay on the doctor's sofa, her eyes fixed on space, lost in a dreadful dream. In an instant the chill of death had come upon her warm young life. Alas, worse than that, it was like the awful awakening of the dead to the sense that there was no God, the masterpiece of that strange genius called Jean-Paul. 4 times La Bougival called her to breakfast. When the faithful creature tried to remonstrate, Ursula waved her hand and answered in one harsh word. "Hush," said despotically, in strange contrast to her usual gentle manner. La Bougival, watching her mistress through the glass door, saw her alternately red with a consuming fever and blue as if a shudder of cold had succeeded that unnatural heat. This condition grew worse and worse up to 4 o'clock. Then she rose to see if Savinien were coming, but he did not come. Jealousy and distrust tear all reserves from love. Ursula, who till then had never made one gesture by which her love could be guessed, now took her hat and shawl and rushed into the passage as if to go and meet him. But an afterthought of modesty sent her back to her little salon, where she stayed and wept. When the Abbé arrived in the evening, La Bougival met him at the door. "Ah, monsieur," she cried, "I don't know what's the matter with mademoiselle. She is—" "I know," said the Abbé sadly, stopping the words of the poor nurse. He then told Ursula, what she had not dared to verify, that Madame de Portenduère had gone to dine at Rouvre. "And Savigny, too?" she asked. "Yes." Ursula was seized with a little nervous tremor which made the Abbé quiver as though a whole Leyden jar had been discharged at him. He felt, moreover, a lasting commotion in his heart. "So we shall not go there tonight," he said, as gently as he could. "And, my child, it would be better if you did not go there again. The old lady will receive you in a way to wound your pride. Monsieur Bongrand and I, who had succeeded in bringing her to consider your marriage, have no idea from what quarter this new influence has come to change her, as it were, in a moment. I expect the worst. Nothing can surprise me now," said Ursula in a pained voice. "In such extremities it is a comfort to feel that we have done nothing to displease God." "Submit, dear daughter, and do not seek to fathom the ways of Providence," said the Abbé. "I shall not unjustly distrust the character of Monsieur de Portenduère." "Why do you no longer call him Savigny?" asked the priest, who detected a slight bitterness in Ursula's tone. "Of my dear Savigny," cried the girl, bursting into tears. "Yes, my good friend," she said, sobbing. "A voice tells me he is as noble in heart as he is in race. He has not only told me that he loves me alone, but he has proved it in 100 delicate ways, and by restraining heroically his ardent feelings. Lately, when he took the hand I held out to him, that evening when Monsieur Bongrand proposed to me a husband, it was the first time, I swear to you, that I had ever given it. He began with a jest when he blew me a kiss across the street, but since then our affection has never outwardly passed, as you well know, the narrowest limits. But I will tell you, you who read my soul except in this one region where none but the angels see, yes, I will tell you, this love has been in me the secret spring of many seeming merits. It made me accept my poverty. It softened the bitterness of my irreparable loss. For my mourning is more perhaps in my clothes now than in my heart. Oh, was I wrong? Can it be that love was stronger in me than my gratitude to my benefactor, and God has punished me for it? But how could it be otherwise? I respected in myself Savigny's future wife. Yes, perhaps I was too proud. Perhaps it is that pride which God has humbled. God alone, as you have often told me, should be the end and object of all our actions." The Abbé was deeply touched as he watched the tears roll down her pallid face. The higher her sense of security had been, the lower she was now to fall. "But," she said, continuing, "if I return to my orphaned condition, I shall know how to take up its feelings. After all, could I have tied a millstone round the neck of him I love? What can he do here? Who am I to bind him to me? Besides, do I not love him with a friendship so divine that I can bear the loss of my own happiness and my hopes? You know I have often blamed myself for letting my hopes rest upon a grave, and for knowing they were waiting on that poor lady's death. If Savigny is rich and happy with another, I have enough to pay for my entrance to a convent, where I shall go at once. There can no more be 2 loves in a woman's heart than there can be 2 masters in heaven, and the life of a religious is attractive to me." "He would not let his mother go alone to Rouvre," said the Abbé gently. "Do not let us talk of that, my dear good friend," she answered. "I will write tonight and set him free. I am glad to have to close the windows of this room," she continued, telling her old friend of the anonymous letters, but declaring that she would not allow any inquiries to be made as to who her unknown lover might be. "Why, it was an anonymous letter that first took Madame de Portenduère to Rouvre," cried the Abbé. "You are annoyed for some object by evil persons." "How can that be? Neither Savagnin nor I have injured anyone, and I am no longer an obstacle to the prosperity of others." "Well, well, my child," said the Abbé quietly, "let us profit by this tempest which has scattered our little circle, to put the library in order. The books are still in heaps. Bongrand and I want to get them in order. We wish to make a search among them. Put your trust in God, and remember also that in our good Bongrand and in me you have 2 devoted friends." "That is much, very much," she said, going with him to the threshold of the door, where she stretched out her neck like a bird looking over its nest, hoping against hope to see Savagnin. Just then Minoret and Goupil, returning from a walk in the meadows, stopped as they passed, and the Colossus spoke to Ursula. "Is anything the matter, cousin? For we are still cousins, are we not? You seem changed." Goupil looked so ardently at Ursula that she was frightened, and went back into the house without replying. "She is cross," said Minoret to the Abbé. "Mademoiselle Minoret is quite right not to talk to men on the threshold of her door," said the Abbé. "She is too young." "Oh," said Goupil, "I am told she doesn't lack lovers." The Abbé bowed hurriedly, and went as fast as he could to the Rue des Bourgeois. "Well," said Goupil to Minoret, "the thing is working. Did you notice how pale she was? Within a fortnight she'll have left the town, you'll see." "Better have you for a friend than an enemy," cried Minoret, frightened at the atrocious grin which gave to Goupil's face the diabolical expression of the Mephistopheles of Joseph Bridau. "I should think so," returned Goupil. "If she doesn't marry me, I'll make her die of grief." "Do it, my boy, and I'll give you the money to buy a practice in Paris. You can then marry a rich woman." "Poor Ursula! What makes you so bitter against her? What has she done to you?" asked the clerk in surprise. "She annoys me," said Minoret gruffly. "Well, wait till Monday, and you shall see how I'll rasp her," said Goupil, studying the expression of the late postmaster's face. The next day La Bougival carried the following letter to Savagnin. "I don't know what the dear child has written to you," she said, "but she is almost dead this morning." Who, reading this letter to her lover, could fail to understand the sufferings the poor girl had gone through during the night? "My dear Savagnin, your mother wishes you to marry Mademoiselle de Rouvre, and perhaps she is right. You are placed between a life that is almost poverty-stricken and a life of opulence, between the betrothed of your heart and a wife in conformity with the demands of the world, between obedience to your mother and the fulfillment of your own choice, for I still believe that you have chosen me. Savagnin, if you have now to make your decision, I wish you to do so in absolute freedom. I give you back the promise you made to yourself, not to me, in a moment which can never fade from my memory, for it was, like other days that have succeeded it, of angelic purity and sweetness. That memory will suffice me for my life. If you should persist in your pledge to me, a dark and terrible idea would henceforth trouble my happiness. In the midst of our privations, which we have hitherto accepted so gaily, you might reflect too late that life would have been to you a better thing had you now conformed to the laws of the world. If you were a man to express that thought, it would be to me the sentence of an agonizing death. If you did not express it, I should watch suspiciously every cloud upon your brow. Dear Savigny, I have preferred you to all else on earth. I was right to do so, for my godfather, though jealous of you, used to say to me, "Love him, my child, you will certainly belong to each other one of these days." When I went to Paris, I loved you hopelessly, and the feeling contented me. I do not know if I can now return to it, but I shall try. What are we, after all, at this moment? Brother and sister. Let us stay so. Marry that happy girl who can have the joy of giving to your name the lustre it ought to have, and which your mother thinks I should diminish. You will not hear of me again. The world will approve of you. I shall never blame you, but I shall love you, ever. Adieu, then. Wait, cried the young man. Signing to La Bougival to sit down, he scratched off hastily the following reply. My dear Ursula, your letter cuts me to the heart, inasmuch as you have needlessly felt such pain, and also because our hearts, for the first time, have failed to understand each other. If you are not my wife now, it is solely because I cannot marry without my mother's consent. Dear, 8,000 francs a year and a pretty cottage on the Loire, why, that's a fortune, is it not? You know, we calculated that if we kept La Bougival, we could lay by half our income every year. You allowed me that evening in your uncle's garden to consider you mine. You cannot now, of yourself, break those ties which are common to both of us. Ursula, need I tell you that I yesterday informed Monsieur de Rouvre that even if I were free, I could not receive a fortune from a young person whom I did not know. My mother refuses to see you again. I must therefore lose the happiness of our evenings, but surely you will not deprive me of the brief moments I can spend at your window? This evening, then, nothing can separate us. Take this to her, my old woman. She must not be unhappy one moment longer. That afternoon at 4 o'clock, returning from the walk which he always took expressly to pass before Ursula's house, Savigny found his mistress waiting for him, her face a little pallid from these sudden changes and excitements. It seems to me that until now I have never known what the pleasure of seeing you is, she said to him. You once said to me, replied Savigny, smiling, for I remember all your words, love lives by patience, we will wait. Dear, you have separated love from faith. Ah, this shall be the end of our quarrels. We will never have another. You have claimed to love me better than I love you, but did I ever doubt you? He said, offering her a bouquet of wild flowers arranged to express his thoughts. You have never had any reason to doubt me, she replied. And besides, you don't know all, she added in a troubled voice. Ursula had refused to receive letters by the post, but that afternoon, without being able even to guess at the nature of the trick, she had found, a few moments before Savagnin's arrival, a letter tossed on her sofa, which contained the words, "Tremble, a rejected lover can become a tiger." Withstanding Savagnin's entreaties, she refused to tell him, out of prudence, the secret of her fears. The delight of seeing him again, after she had thought him lost to her, could alone have made her recover from the mortal chill of terror. The expectation of indefinite evil is torture to everyone. Suffering assumes the proportions of the unknown, and the unknown is the infinite of the soul. To Ursula, the pain was exquisite. Something within her bounded at the slightest noise, yet she was afraid of silence and suspected even the walls of collusion. Even her sleep was restless. Goupil, who knew nothing of her nature, delicate as that of a flower, had found, with the instinct of evil, the poison that could wither and destroy her. The next day passed without a shock. Ursula sat playing on her piano till very late, and went to bed easier in mind and very sleepy. About midnight she was awakened by the music of a band composed of a clarinet, oboe, flute, cornet à piston, trombone, bassoon, flageolet, and triangle. All the neighbors were at their windows. The poor girl, already frightened at seeing the people in the street, received a dreadful shock as she heard the coarse, rough voice of a man proclaiming in loud tones, "For the beautiful Ursula Mirouet, from her lover." The next day, Sunday, the whole town had heard of it, and as Ursula entered and left the church, she saw the groups of people who stood gossiping about her, and felt herself the object of their terrible curiosity. The serenade set all tongues wagging, and conjectures were rife on all sides. Ursula reached home more dead than alive, determined not to leave the house again, the abbe having advised her to say vespers in her own room. As she entered the house, she saw, lying in the passage, which was floored with brick, a letter, which had evidently been slipped under the door. She picked it up and read it, under the idea that it would obtain an explanation. It was as follows: "Resign yourself to becoming my wife, rich and idolized. I am resolved. If you are not mine living, you shall be mine dead. To your refusal you may attribute not only your own misfortunes, but those which will fall on others. He who loves you, and whose wife you will be." Curiously enough, at the very moment that the gentle victim of this plot was drooping like a cut flower, Mesdemoiselles Massin, Dionys, and Crémière were envying her lot. "She is a lucky girl," they were saying. "People talk of her, and court her, and quarrel about her. The serenade was charming. There was a cornet à piston." "What's a piston?" "A new musical instrument as big as this, see," replied Angélique Crémière to Pamela Massin. Early that morning Savagnin had gone to Fontainebleau to endeavour to find out who had engaged the musicians of the regiment then in garrison. But as there were 2 men to each instrument, it was impossible to find out which of them had gone to Nemours. The colonel forbade them to play for any private person in future without his permission. Savagnin had an interview with the Procureur du Roi, Ursula's legal guardian, and explained to him the injury these scenes would do to a young girl naturally so delicate and sensitive, begging him to take some action to discover the author of such wrong. 3 nights later, 3 violins, a flute, a guitar, and an oboe began another serenade. This time the musicians fled towards Montargis, where there happened then to be a company of comic actors. A loud and ringing voice called out as they left, "To the daughter of the regimental bandsman Mirouet." By this means all Nemours came to know the profession of Ursula's father, a secret the old doctor had sedulously kept. Savagnin did not go to Montargis. He received, in the course of the day, an anonymous letter containing a prophecy. "You will never marry Ursula. If you wish her to live, give her up at once to a man who loves her more than you love her. He has made himself a musician and an artist to please her, and he would rather see her dead than let her be your wife." The doctor came to Ursula 3 times in the course of that day, for she was really in danger of death from the horror of this mysterious persecution. Feeling that some infernal hand had plunged her into the mire, the poor girl lay like a martyr. She said nothing, but lifted her eyes to heaven and wept no more. She seemed awaiting other blows, and prayed fervently. "I am glad I cannot go down into the salon," she said to Monsieur Bongrand and the Abbé, who left her as little as possible. "He would come, and I am now unworthy of the looks with which he blessed me. Do you think he will suspect me?" "If Savagnin does not discover the author of these infamies, he means to get the assistance of the Paris police," said Bongrand. "Whoever it is will know I am dying," said Ursula, "and will cease to trouble me." The Abbé, Bongrand, and Savagnin were lost in conjectures and suspicions. Together with Tiennette, La Bougival, and 2 persons on whom the Abbé could rely, they kept the closest watch, and were on their guard night and day for a week, but no indiscretion could betray Goupil, whose machinations were known to himself only. There were no more serenades, and no more letters, and little by little the watch relaxed. Bongrand thought the author of the wrong was frightened. Savagnin believed that the Procureur du Roi, to whom he had sent the letters received by Ursula and himself and his mother, had taken steps to put an end to the persecution. The armistice was not of long duration, however. When the doctor had checked the nervous fever from which poor Ursula was suffering, and just as she was recovering her courage, a rope ladder was found early one morning in July, attached to her window. The postillion of the mail post declared that as he drove past the house in the middle of the night, a small man was in the act of coming down the ladder, and though he tried to pull up, his horses, being startled, carried him down the hill so fast that he was out of Nemours before he stopped them. Some of the persons who frequented Dionys's salon attributed these manoeuvres to the Marquis de Rouvre, then much hampered in means, for Massin held his notes to a large amount. It was said that a prompt marriage of his daughter to Savagnin would save Chateau de Rouvre from his creditors, and Madame de Portenduère, the gossips added, would approve of anything that would discredit and degrade Ursula and lead to this marriage of her son. So far from this being true, the old lady was well nigh vanquished by the sufferings of the innocent girl. The Abbé was so painfully overcome by this act of infernal wickedness that he fell ill himself, and was kept to the house for several days. Poor Ursula, to whom this last insult had caused a relapse, received by post a letter from the Abbé, which was taken in by La Bougival on recognizing the handwriting. It was as follows: "My child, leave Nemours, and thus evade the malice of your enemies. Perhaps they are seeking to endanger Savagnin's life. I will tell you more when I am able to go to you. Your devoted friend, Chaperon." When Savigny, who was almost maddened by these proceedings, carried this letter to the abbé, the poor priest read it and reread it. So amazed and horror-stricken was he to see the perfection with which his own handwriting and signature were imitated. The dangerous condition into which this last atrocity threw poor Ursula sent Savigny once more to the Procureur du Roi with the forged letter. "A murder is being committed by means that the law cannot touch," he said, "upon an orphan whom the code places in your care as legal guardian. What is to be done?" "If you can find any means of repression," said the official, "I will adopt them, but I know of none. That infamous wretch gives the best advice. Mademoiselle Minoret must be sent to the Sisters of the Adoration of the Sacred Heart. Meanwhile, the commissary of police at Fontainebleau shall, at my request, authorize you to carry arms in your own defense. I have been myself to Rouvre, and I found Monsieur de Rouvre justly indignant at the suspicion some of the Nemours people have put upon him. Minoret, the father of my assistant, is in treaty for the purchase of the estate. Mademoiselle is to marry a rich Polish count, and Monsieur de Rouvre himself left the neighborhood the day I saw him to avoid arrest for debt." Désiré Minoret, when questioned by his chief, dared not tell his thought. He recognized Goupil. Goupil, he fully believed, was the only man capable of carrying a persecution to the very verge of the penal code without infringing a hair's breadth upon it. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. A twofold vengeance. Impunity, secrecy, and success increased Goupil's audacity. He made Massin, who was completely his dupe, sue the Marquis de Rouvre for his notes, so as to force him to sell the remainder of his property to Minoret. Thus prepared, he opened negotiations for a practice at Sens, and then resolved to strike a last blow to obtain Ursula. He meant to imitate certain young men in Paris who owed their wives and their fortunes to abduction. He knew that the services he had rendered to Minoret, to Massin, and to Crémière, and the protection of Dionys and the mayor of Nemours would enable him to hush up the affair. He resolved to throw off the mask, believing Ursula too feeble in the condition to which he had reduced her to make any resistance. But before risking this last throw in the game, he thought it best to have an explanation with Minoret, and he chose his opportunity at Rouvre, where he went with his patron for the first time after the deeds were signed. Minoret had that morning received a confidential letter from his son, asking him for information as to what was happening in connection with Ursula, information that he desired to obtain before going to Nemours with the Procureur du Roi to place her under shelter from these atrocities in the convent of the Adoration. Désiré exhorted his father, in case this persecution should be the work of any of their friends, to give to whoever it might be warning and good advice, for even if the law could not punish this crime, it would certainly discover the truth and hold it over the delinquent's head. Minoret had now attained a great object. Owner of the Château de Rouvre, one of the finest estates in the Gâtinais, he had also a rent roll of some 40-odd thousand francs a year from the rich domains which surrounded the park. He could well afford to snap his fingers at Goupil. Besides, he intended to live on the estate, where the sight of Ursula would no longer trouble him. My boy, he said to Goupil as they walked along the terrace, let my young cousin alone now. Pooh, said the clerk, unable to imagine what such capricious conduct meant. Oh, I'm not ungrateful. You have enabled me to get this fine brick chateau with the stone copings, which couldn't be built now for 200,000 francs, and those farms and preserves and the park and gardens and woods, all for 280,000 francs. No, I'm not ungrateful. I'll give you 10%, 20,000 francs for your services, and you can buy a sheriff's practice in Nemours. I'll guarantee you a marriage with one of Crémiere's daughters, the eldest. The one who talks piston? Cried Goupil. She'll have 30,000 francs, replied Minoret. Don't you see, my dear boy, that you are cut out for a sheriff, just as I was to be a postmaster? People should keep to their vocation. Very well, then, said Goupil, falling from the pinnacle of his hopes. Here's a stamped cheque. Write me an order for 20,000 francs. I want the money in hand at once. Minoret had 18,000 francs by him at that moment, of which his wife knew nothing. He thought the best way to get rid of Goupil was to sign the draft. The clerk, seeing the flush of seigneurial fever on the face of the imbecile and colossal Machiavelli, threw him an au revoir by way of farewell, accompanied with a glance which would have made anyone but an idiotic parvenu, lost in contemplation of the magnificent chateau built in the style in vogue under Louis XIII, tremble in his shoes. "Are you not going to wait for me?" he cried, observing that Goupil was going away on foot. "You'll find me on our path, never fear, Papa Minoret," replied Goupil, athirst for vengeance, and resolved to know the meaning of the zigzags of Minoret's strange conduct. Since the day when the last vile calumny had sullied her life, Ursula, a prey to one of those inexplicable maladies, the seat of which is in the soul, seemed to be rapidly nearing death. She was deathly pale, speaking only at rare intervals and then in slow and feeble words. Everything about her, her glance of gentle indifference, even the expression of her forehead, all revealed the presence of some consuming thought. She was thinking how the ideal wreath of chastity, with which throughout all ages the peoples crowned their virgins, had fallen from her brow. She heard in the void and in the silence the dishonoring words, the malicious comments, the laughter of the little town. The trial was too heavy, her innocence was too delicate to allow her to survive the murderous blow. She complained no more. A sorrowful smile was on her lips. Her eyes appealed to heaven, to the sovereign of angels, against man's injustice. When Goupil reached Nemours, Ursula had just been carried down from her chamber to the ground floor in the arms of La Bougival and the doctor. A great event was about to take place. When Madame de Portenduère became really aware that the girl was dying like an ermine, though less injured in her honour than Clarissa Harlowe, she resolved to go to her and comfort her. The sight of her son's anguish, who during the whole preceding night had seemed beside himself, made the Breton soul of the old woman yield. Moreover, it seemed worthy of her own dignity to revive the courage of a girl so pure, and she saw in her visit a counterpoise to all the evil done by the little town. Her opinion, surely more powerful than that of the crowd, ought to carry with it, she thought, the influence of race. This step, which the abbé came to announce, made so great a change in Ursula that the doctor, who was about to ask for a consultation of Parisian doctors, recovered hope. They placed her on her uncle's sofa, and such was the character of her beauty that, as she lay there in her mourning garments, pale from suffering, she was more exquisitely lovely than in the happiest hours of her life. When Savagnin, with his mother on his arm, entered the room, she colored vividly. "Do not rise, my child," said the old lady imperatively. "Weak and ill as I am myself, I wish to come and tell you my feelings about what is happening. I respect you as the purest, the most religious and excellent girl in the Gâtinais, and I think you worthy to make the happiness of a gentleman." At first poor Ursula was unable to answer. She took the withered hands of Savagnin's mother and kissed them. "Ah, madame," she said in a faltering voice, "I should never have had the boldness to think of rising above my condition if I had not been encouraged by promises. My only claim was that of an affection without bounds. But now they have found the means to separate me from him I love. They have made me unworthy of him. Never," she cried, with a ring in her voice which painfully affected those about her, "never will I consent to give to any man a degraded hand, a stained reputation. I loved too well, yes, I can admit it in my present condition. I love a creature almost as I love God, and God—" "Hush, my child, do not calumniate God. Come, my daughter," said the old lady, making an effort, "do not exaggerate the harm done by an infamous joke in which no one believes. I give you my word, you will live, and you shall be happy." "We shall be happy," cried Savagnin, kneeling beside Ursula and kissing her hand. "My mother has called you her daughter." "Enough, enough," said the doctor, feeling his patient's pulse. "Do not kill her with joy." At that moment, Goupil, who found the street door ajar, opened that of the little salon, and showed his hideous face, blazing with thoughts of vengeance, which had crowded into his mind as he hurried along. "Monsieur de Portenduère," he said, in a voice like the hissing of a viper forced from its hole. "What do you want?" said Savagnin, rising from his knees. "I have a word to say to you." Savagnin left the room, and Goupil took him into the little courtyard. "Swear to me by Ursula's life, by your honour as a gentleman, to do by me as if I had never told you what I am about to tell. Do this, and I will reveal to you the cause of the persecutions directed against Mademoiselle Mirouet." "Can I put a stop to them?" "Yes." "Can I avenge them?" "On their author, yes. On his tool, no." "Why not?" "Because I am the tool." Savagnin turned pale. "I have just seen Ursula," said Goupil. "Ursula?" said the lover, looking fixedly at the clerk. "Mademoiselle Mirouet," continued Goupil, made respectful by Savagnin's tone, "and I would undo with my blood the wrong that has been done. I repent of it. If you were to kill me, in a duel or otherwise, what good would my blood do you? Can you drink it? At this moment it would poison you." The cold reasoning of the man, together with a feeling of eager curiosity, calmed Savagnin's anger. He fixed his eyes on Goupil with a look which made that moral deformity writhe. "Who set you at this work?" said the young man. Will you swear? What, to do you no harm? I wish that you and Mademoiselle Mirouet should forgive me. She will forgive you, I never. But at least you will forget? What terrible power the reason has when it is used to further self-interest. Here were two men, longing to tear one another in pieces, standing in that courtyard within 2 inches of each other, compelled to talk together and united by a single sentiment. I will forgive you, but I shall not forget. The agreement is off, said Goupil coldly. Savigny lost patience. He applied a blow upon the man's face which echoed through the courtyard and nearly knocked him down, making Savigny himself stagger. It is only what I deserve, said Goupil, for committing such a folly. I thought you more noble than you are. You have abused the advantage I gave you. You are in my power now, he added with a look of hatred. You are a murderer, said Savigny. No more than a dagger is a murderer. I beg your pardon, said Savigny. Are you revenged enough? Said Goupil with ferocious irony. Will you stop here? Reciprocal pardon and forgetfulness, replied Savigny. Give me your hand, said the clerk, holding out his own. It is yours, said Savigny, swallowing the shame for Ursula's sake. Now speak. Who made you do this thing? Goupil looked into the scales, as it were. On one side was Savigny's blow, on the other his hatred against Minoret. For a second he was undecided. Then a voice said to him, You will be notary. And he answered, Pardon and forgetfulness? Yes, on both sides, monsieur. Who is persecuting Ursula? Persisted Savigny. Minoret. He would have liked to see her buried. Why? I can't tell you that, but we might find out the reason. Don't mix me up in all this. I could do nothing to help you if the others distrusted me. Instead of annoying Ursula, I will defend her. Instead of serving Minoret, I will try to defeat his schemes. I live only to ruin him, to destroy him. I'll crush him underfoot. I'll dance on his carcass. I'll make his bones into dominoes. Tomorrow, every wall in Namur and Fontainebleau and Rouvre shall blaze with the letters, Minoret is a thief. Yes, I'll burst him like a gun. There, we're allies now by the imprudence of that outbreak. If you choose, I'll beg Mademoiselle Mirouet's pardon and tell her I curse the madness which impelled me to injure her. It may do her good. The Abbé and the Justice are both there, but Monsieur Bongrand must promise on his honor not to injure my career. I have a career now. Wait a minute, said Savigny, bewildered by the revelation. Ursula, my child, he said, returning to the salon, the author of all your troubles is ashamed of his work. He repents and wishes to ask your pardon in presence of these gentlemen, on condition that all be forgotten. What? Goupil? Cried the Abbé, the Justice, and the doctor all together. Keep his secret, said Ursula, putting a finger on her lips. Goupil heard the words, saw the gesture, and was touched. Mademoiselle, he said in a troubled voice, I wish that all Namur could hear me tell you that a fatal passion has bewildered my brain and led me to commit a crime punishable by the blame of honest men. What I say now I would be willing to say everywhere, deploring the harm done by such miserable tricks, which may have hastened your happiness, he added rather maliciously, for I see that Madame de Portenduère is with you. That is all very well, Goupil, said the Abbé. Mademoiselle forgives you, but you must not forget that you came near being her murderer. Monsieur Bongrand, said Goupil, addressing the justice of peace, I shall negotiate tonight for Lecaire's practice. I hope the reparation I have now made will not injure me with you, and that you will back my petition to the bar and the ministry. Bongrand made a thoughtful inclination of his head, and Goupil left the house to negotiate on the best terms he could for the sheriff's practice. The others remained with Ursula and did their best to restore the peace and tranquillity of her mind, already much relieved by Goupil's confession. You see, my child, that God was not against you, said the Abbé. Minoret came home late from Rouvre. About 9 o'clock he was sitting in the Chinese pagoda, digesting his dinner beside his wife, with whom he was making plans for Désirée's future. Désirée had become very sedate since entering the magistracy. He worked hard, and it was not unlikely that he would succeed the present procureur du roi at Fontainebleau, who, they said, was to be advanced to Melun. His parents felt that they must find him a wife, some poor girl belonging to an old and noble family. He would then make his way to the magistracy of Paris. Perhaps they could get him elected deputy from Fontainebleau, where Zélie was proposing to pass the winter after living at Rouvre for the summer season. Minoret, inwardly congratulating himself for having managed his affairs so well, no longer thought or cared about Ursula, at the very moment when the drama so heedlessly begun by him was closing down upon him in a terrible manner. Monsieur de Portenduère is here, and wishes to speak to you, said Cabirolle. Show him in, answered Zélie. The twilight shadows prevented Madame Minoret from noticing the sudden pallor of her husband, who shuddered as he heard Savagnin's boots on the floor of the gallery where the doctor's library used to be. A vague presentiment of danger ran through the robber's veins. Savagnin entered and remained standing, with his hat on his head, his cane in his hand, and both hands crossed in front of him, motionless before the husband and wife. I have come to ascertain, Monsieur and Madame Minoret, he said, your reasons for tormenting in an infamous manner a young lady who, as the whole town knows, is to be my wife. Why have you endeavored to tarnish her honor? Why have you wished to kill her? Why did you deliver her over to Goupil's insults? Answer. How absurd you are, Monsieur Savagnin, said Zélie, to come and ask us the meaning of a thing we think inexplicable. I bother myself as little about Ursula as I do about the year one. Since Uncle Minoret died, I've not thought of her more than I do of my first tooth. I've never said one word about her to Goupil, who is, moreover, a queer rogue whom I wouldn't think of consulting about even a dog. Why don't you speak up, Minoret? Are you going to let Monsieur box your ears in that way and accuse you of wickedness that's beneath you? As if a man with 48,000 francs a year from landed property and a castle fit for a prince would stoop to such things. Get up, and don't sit there like a wet rag. I don't know what monsieur means, said Minoret in his squeaking voice, the trembling of which was all the more noticeable because the voice was clear. What object could I have in persecuting the girl? I may have said to Goupil how annoyed I was at seeing her in Nemours. My son Désiré fell in love with her, and I didn't want him to marry her, that's all. Goupil has confessed everything, Monsieur Minoret. There was a moment's silence, but it was terrible, when all three persons examined one another. Zélie saw a nervous quiver on the heavy face of her colossus. "Though you are only insects," said the young nobleman, "I will make you feel my vengeance. It is not from you, Monsieur Minoret, a man of 68 years of age, but from your son that I shall seek satisfaction for the insults offered to Mademoiselle Mirouet. The first time he sets his foot in Nemours, we shall meet. He must fight me. He will do so, or be dishonored and never dare to show his face again. If he does not come to Nemours, I shall go to Fontainebleau, for I will have satisfaction. It shall never be said that you were tamely allowed to dishonor a defenseless young girl." "But the calumnies of a Goupil are not—" began Minoret. "Do you wish me to bring him face to face with you? Believe me, you had better hush up this affair. It lies between you and Goupil and me. Leave it as it is. God will decide between us when I meet your son." "But this shan't go on," cried Zélie. "Do you suppose I'll stand by and let Désiré fight you, a sailor whose business it is to handle swords and guns? If you've got any cause of complaint against Minoret, there's Minoret. Take Minoret, fight Minoret. But do you think my boy, who by your own account knew nothing of all this, is going to bear the brunt of it? No, my little gentleman, somebody's teeth will pin your legs first. Come, Minoret, don't stand staring there like a big canary. You are in your own house, and you allow a man to keep his hat on before your wife? I say he shall go. Now, monsieur, be off. A man's house is his castle. I don't know what you mean with your nonsense, but show me your heels, and if you dare touch Désiré, you'll have to answer to me. You and your minx, Ursula." She rang the bell violently and called to the servants. "Remember what I have said to you," repeated Savagnin to Minoret, paying no attention to Zélie's tirade. Suspending the sword of Damocles over their heads, he left the room. "Now then, Minoret," said Zélie, "you will explain to me what this all means. A young man doesn't rush into a house and make an uproar like that and demand the blood of a family for nothing." "It's some mischief of that vile Goupil," said the Colossus. "I promised to help him buy a practice if he would get me the Rouvre property cheap. I gave him 10% on the cost, 20,000 francs in a note, and I suppose he isn't satisfied." "Yes, but why did he get up those serenades and the scandals against Ursula?" "He wanted to marry her." "A girl without a penny? The sly thing! Now, Minoret, you are telling me lies, and you are too much of a fool, my son, to make me believe them. There is something under all this, and you are going to tell me what it is." "There's nothing." "Nothing! I tell you, you lie, and I shall find it out." "Do let me alone." "I'll turn the faucet of that fountain of venom, Goupil, whom you're afraid of, and we'll see who gets the best of it then." "Just as you choose." "I know very well it will be as I choose, and what I choose first and foremost is that no harm shall come to Désiré. If anything happens to him, mark you, I'll do something that may send me to the scaffold, and you haven't any feeling about him." A quarrel thus begun between Minoret and his wife was sure not to end without a long and angry strife. So, at the moment of his self-satisfaction, the foolish robber found his inward struggle against himself and against Ursula revived by his own fault, and complicated with a new and terrible adversary. The next day, when he left the house early to find Goupil and try to appease him with additional money, the walls were already placarded with the words, "Minoret is a thief." All those whom he met commiserated him and asked him who was the author of the anonymous placard. Fortunately for him, everybody made allowance for his equivocal replies by reflecting on his utter stupidity. Fools get more advantage from their weakness than able men from their strength. The world looks on at a great man battling against fate and does not help him, but it supplies the capital of a grocer who may fail and lose all. Why? Because men like to feel superior in protecting an incapable, and are displeased at not feeling themselves the equal of a man of genius. A clever man would have been lost in public estimation had he stammered, as Minoret did, evasive and foolish answers with a frightened air. Célie sent her servants to efface the vindictive words wherever they were found, but the effect of them on Minoret's conscience still remained. The result of his interview with his assailant was soon apparent. Though Goupil had concluded his bargain with the sheriff the night before, he now impudently refused to fulfill it. "My dear Laquer," he said, "I am unexpectedly enabled to buy up Monsieur Dionys's practice. I am therefore in a position to help you to sell to others. Tear up the agreement. It's only the loss of 2 stamps. Here are 70 centimes." Laquer was too much afraid of Goupil to complain. All Nemours knew before night that Minoret had given Dionys security to enable Goupil to buy his practice. The latter wrote to Savigny denying his charges against Minoret, and telling the young nobleman that in his new position he was forbidden by the rules of the Supreme Court and also by his respect for law to fight a duel. But he warned Savigny to treat him well in future, assuring him he was a capital boxer and would break his leg at the first offense. The walls of Nemours were cleared of the inscription, but the quarrel between Minoret and his wife went on, and Savigny maintained a threatening silence. 10 days after these events, the marriage of Mademoiselle Masson, the elder, to the future notary was bruited about the town. Mademoiselle Masson had a dowry of 80,000 francs and her own peculiar ugliness. Goupil had his deformities and his practice. The union, therefore, seemed suitable and probable. One evening, towards midnight, 2 unknown men seized Goupil in the street as he was leaving Masson's house, gave him a sound beating, and disappeared. The notary kept the matter a profound secret, and even contradicted an old woman who saw the scene from her window and thought that she recognized him. These great little events were carefully studied by Bongrand, who became convinced that Goupil held some mysterious power over Minoret, and he determined to find out its cause. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. Apparitions. Though the public opinion of the little town recognized Ursula's perfect innocence, she recovered slowly. While in a state of bodily exhaustion, which left her mind and spirit free, She became the medium of phenomena, the effects of which were astounding, and of a nature to challenge science, if science had been brought into contact with them. 10 days after Madame de Portenduer's visit, Ursula had a dream, with all the characteristics of a supernatural vision, as much in its moral aspects as in the, so to speak, physical circumstances. Her godfather appeared to her, and made a sign that she should come with him. She dressed herself and followed him through the darkness to their former house in the Rue des Bourgeois, where she found everything precisely as it was on the day of her godfather's death. The old man wore the clothes that were on him the evening before his death. His face was pale, his movements caused no sound. Nevertheless, Ursula heard his voice distinctly, though it was feeble and as if repeated by a distant echo. The doctor conducted his child as far as the Chinese pagoda, where he made her lift the marble top of the little Boule cabinet, just as she had raised it on the day of his death. But instead of finding nothing there, she saw the letter her godfather had told her to fetch. She opened it and read both the letter addressed to herself and the will in favor of Savigny. The writing, as she afterwards told the abbé, shone as if traced by sunbeams. "It burned my eyes," she said. When she looked at her uncle to thank him, she saw the old benevolent smile upon his discolored lips. Then, in a feeble voice, but still clearly, he told her to look at Minoret, who was listening in the corridor to what he said to her, and next, slipping the lock of the library door with his knife and taking the papers from the study. With his right hand the old man seized his goddaughter and obliged her to walk at the pace of death and follow Minoret to his own house. Ursula crossed the town, entered the post-house, and went into Zélie's old room, where the spectre showed her Minoret unfolding the letters, reading them, and burning them. "He could not," said Ursula, telling her dream to the abbé, "light the first 2 matches, but the third took fire. He burned the papers and buried their remains in the ashes. Then my godfather brought me back to our house, and I saw Minoret-Levrault slipping into the library, where he took from the 3rd volume of Pandects 3 certificates of 12,000 francs each. Also from the preceding volume a number of bank-notes. 'He is,' said my godfather, 'the cause of all the trouble which has brought you to the verge of the tomb. But God wills that you shall yet be happy. You will not die now. You will marry Savigny. If you love me and if you love Savigny, I charge you to demand your fortune from my nephew. Swear it.' Resplendent as though transfigured, the spectre had so powerful an influence on Ursula's soul that she promised all her uncle asked, hoping to put an end to the nightmare. She woke suddenly and found herself standing in the middle of her bedroom, facing her godfather's portrait, which had been placed there during her illness. She went back to bed and fell asleep after much agitation, and on waking again she remembered all the particulars of this singular vision, but she dared not speak of it. Her judgment and her delicacy both shrank from revealing a dream, the end and object of which was her pecuniary benefit. She attributed the vision, not unnaturally, to remarks made by La Bougival the preceding evening, when the old woman talked of the doctor's intended liberality, and of her own convictions on that subject. But the dream returned, with aggravated circumstances which made it fearful to the poor girl. On the second occasion, the icy hand of her godfather was laid upon her shoulder, causing her the most horrible distress, an indefinable sensation. "You must obey the dead," he said in a sepulchral voice. Tears, said Ursula, relating her dreams, fell from his white, wide-open eyes. The third time the vision came, the dead man took her by the braids of her long hair and showed her the postmaster talking with Goupil and promising money if he would remove Ursula to Sens. Ursula then decided to relate the 3 dreams to the Abbé Chaperon. Monsieur l'Abbé, she said, do you believe that the dead reappear? My child, sacred history, profane history, and modern history have much testimony to that effect, but the Church has never made it an article of faith. And as for science, in France, science laughs at the idea. What do you believe? That the power of God is infinite. Did my godfather ever speak to you of such matters? Yes, often. He had entirely changed his views of them. His conversion, as he told me at least 20 times, dated from the day when a woman in Paris heard you praying for him in Nemours, and saw the red dot you made against Saint-Savagnin's day in your almanac. Ursula uttered a piercing cry, which alarmed the priest. She remembered the scene when, on returning to Nemours, her godfather read her soul and took away the almanac. If that is so, she said, then my visions are possibly true. My godfather has appeared to me as Jesus appeared to his disciples. He was wrapped in yellow light. He spoke to me. I beg you to say a mass for the repose of his soul, and to implore the help of God that these visions may cease, for they are destroying me. She then related the 3 dreams with all their details, insisting on the truth of what she said, on her own freedom of action, on the somnambulism of her inner being, which, she said, detached itself from her body at the bidding of the spectre, and followed him with perfect ease. The thing that most surprised the abbé, to whom Ursula's veracity was known, was the exact description which she gave of the bedroom formerly occupied by Zélie at the post-house, which Ursula had never entered, and about which no one had ever spoken to her. By what means can these singular apparitions take place? Asked Ursula. What did my godfather think? Your godfather, my dear child, argued my hypothesis. He recognized the possibility of a spiritual world, a world of ideas. If ideas are of man's creation, if they subsist in a life of their own, they must have forms which our external senses cannot grasp, but which are perceptible to our inward senses when brought under certain conditions. Thus your godfather's ideas might so enfold you that you would clothe them with his bodily presence. Then, if Minoret really committed those actions, they too resolve themselves into ideas, for all action is the result of many ideas. Now, if ideas live and move in a spiritual world, your spirit must be able to perceive them if it penetrates that world. These phenomena are not more extraordinary than those of memory, and those of memory are quite as amazing and inexplicable as those of the perfume of plants, which are perhaps the ideas of the plants. How you enlarge and magnify the world, exclaimed Ursula. But to hear the dead speak, to see them walk, act, do you think it possible? In Sweden, replied the abbé, Swedenborg has proved by evidence that he communicated with the dead. But come with me into the library, and you shall read In the Life of the Famous Duc de Montmorency, beheaded at Toulouse, and who certainly was not a man to invent foolish tales, an adventure very like yours, which happened 100 years earlier at Cardin." Ursula and the abbe went upstairs, and the good man hunted up a little edition in duodecimo, printed in Paris in 1666, of the History of Henri de Montmorency, written by a priest of that period who had known the prince. "Read it," said the abbe, giving Ursula the volume, which he had opened at the 175th page. "Your godfather often reread that passage. And see, here's a little of his snuff in it." "And he not here," said Ursula, taking the volume to read the passage. "The siege of Privas was remarkable for the loss of a great number of officers. 2 brigadier generals died there, namely the Marquis d'Ussel, of a wound received at the outposts, and the Marquis de Porte, from a musket shot through the head. The day the latter was killed, he was to have been made a marshal of France. About the moment when the Marquis expired, the Duc de Montmorency, who was sleeping in his tent, was awakened by a voice like that of the Marquis, bidding him farewell. The affection he felt for a friend so near him made him attribute the illusion of this dream to the force of his own imagination, and owing to the fatigues of the night, which he had spent, according to his custom, in the trenches, he fell asleep once more without any sense of dread. But the same voice disturbed him again, and the phantom obliged him to wake up and listen to the same words it had said as it first passed. The Duke then recollected that he had heard the philosopher Pirie discourse on the possibility of the separation of the soul from the body, and that he and the Marquis had agreed that the first who died should bid adieu to the other. On which, not being able to restrain his fears as to the truth of this warning, he sent a servant to the Marquis's quarters, which were distant from him. But before the man could get back, the king sent to inform the duke, by persons fitted to console him, of the great loss he had sustained. I leave learned men to discuss the cause of this event, which I have frequently heard the Duc de Montmorency relate. I think that the truth and singularity of the fact itself ought to be recorded and preserved." "If all this is so," said Ursula, "what ought I to do?" "My child," said the abbe, "it concerns matters so important, and which may prove so profitable to you, that you ought to keep absolutely silent about it. Now that you have confided to me the secret of these apparitions, perhaps they may not return. Besides, you are now strong enough to come to church. Well then, come tomorrow, and thank God and pray to him for the repose of your godfather's soul. Feel sure that you have entrusted your secret to prudent hands." "If you knew how afraid I am to go to sleep, what glances my godfather gives me! The last time he caught hold of my dress, I awoke with my face all covered with tears." "Be at peace. He will not come again," said the priest. Without losing a moment, the Abbé Chaperon went straight to Minoret and asked for a few moments' interview in the Chinese pagoda, requesting that they might be entirely alone. "Can anyone hear us?" he asked. "No one," replied Minoret. "Monsieur, my character must be known to you," said the Abbé, fastening a gentle but attentive look on Minoret's face. "I have to speak to you of serious and extraordinary matters which concern you, and about which you may be sure that I shall keep the profoundest secrecy. But it is impossible for me to do otherwise than give you this information. While your uncle lived, there stood there, said the priest, pointing to a certain spot in the room, a small buffet made by Boule, with a marble top. Minoret turned livid. And beneath the marble your uncle placed a letter for Ursula. The abbe then went on to relate, without omitting the smallest circumstance, Minoret's conduct to Minoret himself. When the late postmaster heard the detail of the 2 matches refusing to light, he felt his hair begin to writhe on his skull. "Who invented such nonsense?" he said in a strangled voice when the tale ended. "The dead man himself." This answer made Minoret tremble, for he himself had dreamed of the doctor. "God is very good, Monsieur l'Abbé, to do miracles for me," he said, danger inspiring him to make the sole jest of his life. "All that God does is natural," replied the priest. "Your phantoms don't frighten me," said the Colossus, recovering his coolness. "I did not come to frighten you, for I shall never speak of this to anyone in the world," said the Abbé. "You alone know the truth. The matter is between you and God." "Come now, Monsieur l'Abbé, do you really think me capable of such a horrible abuse of confidence?" "I believe only in crimes which are confessed to me, and of which the sinner repents," said the priest in an apostolic tone. "Crime?" cried Minoret. "A crime frightful in its consequences." "What consequences?" "In the fact that it escapes human justice. The crimes which are not expiated here below will be punished in another world. God himself avenges innocence." "Do you think God concerns himself with such trifles?" "If he did not see the worlds in all their details at a glance, as you take a landscape into your eye, he would not be God." "Monsieur l'Abbé, will you give me your word of honor that you have had these facts from my uncle?" "Your uncle has appeared 3 times to Ursula, and has told them and repeated them to her. Exhausted by such visions, she revealed them to me privately. She considers them so devoid of reason that she will never speak of them. You may make yourself easy on that point." "I am easy on all points, Monsieur Chaperon." "I hope you are," said the old priest. "Even if I considered these warnings absurd, I should still feel bound to inform you of them, considering the singular nature of the details. You are an honest man, and you have obtained your handsome fortune in too legal a way to wish to add to it by theft. Besides, you are an almost primitive man, and you would be tortured by remorse. We have within us, be we savage or civilized, the sense of what is right, and this will not permit us to enjoy in peace ill-gotten gains acquired against the laws of the society in which we live, for well-constituted societies are modelled on the system God has ordained for the universe. In this respect, societies have a divine origin. Man does not originate ideas, he invents no form, he answers to the eternal relations that surround him on all sides. Therefore, see what happens. Criminals going to the scaffold and having it in their power to carry their secret with them are compelled by the force of some mysterious power to make confessions before their heads are taken off. Therefore, Monsieur Minoret, if your mind is at ease, I go my way satisfied." Minoret was so stupefied that he allowed the Abbé to find his own way out. When he thought himself alone, he flew into the fury of a choleric man. The strangest blasphemies escaped his lips, in which Ursula's name was mingled with odious language. "Why, what has she done to you?" cried Zélie, who had slipped in on tiptoe after seeing the abbé out of the house. For the first and only time in his life, Minoret, drunk with anger and driven to extremities by his wife's reiterated questions, turned upon her and beat her so violently that he was obliged, when she fell half dead on the floor, to take her in his arms and put her to bed himself, ashamed of his act. He was taken ill, and the doctor bled him twice. When he appeared again in the streets, everybody noticed a great change in him. He walked alone, and often roamed the town as though uneasy. When anyone addressed him, he seemed preoccupied in his mind, he who had never before had two ideas in his head. At last, one evening he went up to Monsieur Bongrand in the Grand Rue, the latter being on his way to take Ursula to Madame de Portenduère's, where the whist parties had begun again. "Monsieur Bongrand, I have something important to say to my cousin," he said, taking the justice by the arm, "and I am very glad you should be present, for you can advise her." They found Ursula studying. She rose, with a cold and dignified air, as soon as she saw Minoret. "My child, Monsieur Minoret wants to speak to you on a matter of business," said Bongrand. "By the by, don't forget to give me your certificates. I shall go to Paris in the morning and will draw your dividend and La Bougivar's." "Cousin," said Minoret, "our uncle accustomed you to more luxury than you have now." "We can be very happy with very little money," she replied. "I thought money might help your happiness," continued Minoret, "and I have come to offer you some, out of respect for the memory of my uncle." "You had a natural way of showing respect for him," said Ursula sternly. "You could have left his house as it was, and allowed me to buy it. Instead of that, you put it at a high price, hoping to find some hidden treasure in it." "But," said Minoret, evidently troubled, "if you had 12,000 francs a year, you would be in a position to marry well." "I have not got them." "But suppose I give them to you on condition of your buying an estate in Brittany, near Madame de Portenduère. You could then marry her son." "Monsieur Minoret," said Ursula, "I have no claim to that money, and I cannot accept it from you. We are scarcely relations, still less are we friends. I have suffered too much from calumny to give a handle for evil speaking. What have I done to deserve that money? What reason have you to make me such a present? These questions, which I have a right to ask, persons will answer as they see fit. Some would consider your gift the reparation of a wrong, and as such I choose not to accept it. Your uncle did not bring me up to ignoble feelings. I can accept nothing except from friends, and I have no friendship for you." "Then you refuse?" cried the Colossus, into whose head the idea had never entered that a fortune could be rejected. "I refuse," said Ursula. "But what grounds have you for offering Mademoiselle Ursula such a fortune?" asked Bongrand, looking fixedly at Minoret. "You have an idea—" "Have you an idea?" "Well, yes, the idea of getting her out of Nemours, so that my son will leave me in peace. He is in love with her and wants to marry her." "Well, we'll see about it," said Bongrand, settling his spectacles. "Give us time to think it over." He walked home with Minoret, applauding the solicitude shown by the father for his son's interests, and slightly blaming Ursula for her hasty decision. As soon as Minoret was within his own gate, Bongrand went to the post-house, borrowed a horse and cabriolet, and started for Fontainebleau, where he went to see the deputy procureur, and was told that he was spending the evening at the house of the sub-prefect. Bongrand, delighted, followed him there. Désirée was playing whist with the wife of the procureur du roi, the wife of the sub-prefect, and the colonel of the regiment in garrison. "I come to bring you some good news," said Bongrand to Désirée. "You love your cousin Ursula, and the marriage can be arranged." "I love Ursula Mirouet?" cried Désirée, laughing. "Where did you get that idea? I do remember seeing her sometimes at the late Dr. Minoret's. She certainly is a beauty, but she is dreadfully pious. I certainly took notice of her charms, but I must say I never troubled my head seriously for that rather insipid little blonde," he added, smiling at the sub-prefect's wife, who was a piquante brunette, to use a term of the last century. "You are dreaming, my dear Monsieur Bongrand. I thought everyone knew that my father was a lord of a manor, with a rent roll of 45,000 francs a year from lands around his chateau at Rouvre. Good reasons why I should not love the goddaughter of my late great-uncle. If I were to marry a girl without a penny, these ladies would consider me a fool." "Have you never tormented your father to let you marry Ursula?"
"Never."
"You hear that, monsieur?" said the justice to the procureur du roi, who had been listening to the conversation, leading him aside into the recess of a window, where they remained in conversation for a quarter of an hour. An hour later, Bongrand was back in Nemours, at Ursula's house, whence he sent la Bougival to Minoret to beg his attendance. The Colossus came at once. "Mademoiselle," began Bongrand, addressing Minoret as he entered the room. "Accepts?" cried Minoret, interrupting him. "No, not yet," replied Bongrand, fingering his glasses. "I had scruples as to your son's feelings, for Ursula has been much tried lately about a supposed lover. We know the importance of tranquillity. Can you swear to me that your son truly loves her, and that you have no other intention than to preserve our dear Ursula from any further Goupillisms?" "Oh, I'll swear to that," cried Minoret. "Stop, Papa Minoret," said the justice, taking one hand from the pocket of his trousers to slap Minoret on the shoulder. The Colossus trembled. "Don't swear falsely."
"Swear falsely?"
"Yes, either you or your son, who has just sworn at Fontainebleau, in presence of 4 persons and the procureur du roi, that he has never even thought of his cousin Ursula. You have other reasons for offering this fortune. I saw you were inventing that tale, and went myself to Fontainebleau to question your son." Minoret was dumbfounded at his own folly. "But where's the harm, Monsieur Bongrand, in proposing to a young relative to help on a marriage which seems to be for her happiness, and to invent pretexts to conquer her reluctance to accept the money?" Minoret, whose danger suggested to him an excuse which was almost admissible, wiped his forehead, wet with perspiration. "You know the cause of my refusal," said Ursula, "and I request you never to come here again. Though Monsieur de Portenduère has not told me his reason, I know that he feels such contempt for you, such dislike even, that I cannot receive you into my house. My happiness is my only fortune. I do not blush to say so. I shall not risk it. Monsieur de Portenduère is only waiting for my majority to marry me." "Then the old saw that money does all is a lie," said Minoret, looking at the justice of peace, whose observing eyes annoyed him so much. He rose and left the house, but once outside he found the air as oppressive as in the little salon. "There must be an end put to this," he said to himself as he re-entered his own home. When Ursula came down, bringing her certificates and those of la Bougival, she found Monsieur Bongrand walking up and down the salon with great strides. "Have you no idea what the conduct of that huge idiot means?" he said. "None that I can tell," she replied. Bongrand looked at her with inquiring surprise. "Then we have the same idea," he said. "Here, keep the number of your certificates in case I lose them. You should always take that precaution." Bongrand himself wrote the number of the two certificates, hers and that of la Bougival, and gave them to her. "Adieu, my child. I shall be gone 2 days, but you will see me on the 3rd. That night the apparition appeared to Ursula in a singular manner. She thought her bed was in the cemetery of Nemours, and that her uncle's grave was at the foot of it. The white stone on which she read the inscription opened like the cover of an oblong album. She uttered a piercing cry, but the doctor's spectre slowly rose. First she saw his yellow head with its fringe of white hair, which shone as if surmounted by a halo. Beneath the bald forehead the eyes were like 2 gleams of light. The dead man rose as if impelled by some superior force or will. Ursula's body trembled, her flesh was like a burning garment, and there was, as she subsequently said, another self moving within her bodily presence. "Mercy!" she cried. "Mercy, godfather!" "It is too late," he said in the voice of death, to use the poor girl's own expression when she related this new dream to the Abbé. "He has been warned. He has paid no heed to the warning. The days of his son are numbered. If he does not confess all, and restore what he has taken within a certain time, he must lose his son, who will die a violent and horrible death. Let him know this." The spectre pointed to a line of figures which gleamed upon the side of the tomb as if written with fire, and said, "There is his doom." When her uncle lay down again in his grave, Ursula heard the sound of the stone falling back into its place, and immediately after, in the distance, a strange sound of horses and the cries of men. The next day Ursula was prostrate. She could not rise, so terribly had the dream overcome her. She begged her nurse to find the Abbé Chaperon and bring him to her. The good priest came as soon as he had said Mass, but he was not surprised at Ursula's revelation. He believed the robbery had been committed, and no longer tried to explain to himself the abnormal condition of his little dreamer. He left Ursula at once and went directly to Minoret's. "Monsieur l'Abbé," said Zélie, "my husband's temper is so soured I don't know what he mightn't do. Until now he's been a child, but for the last 2 months he's not the same man. To get angry enough to strike me, so gentle. There must be something dreadful the matter to change him like that. You'll find him among the rocks. He spends all his time there. Doing what, I'd like to know. In spite of the heat, it was then September 1836, the abbé crossed the canal and took a path which led to the base of one of the rocks, where he saw Minoret. "You are greatly troubled, Monsieur Minoret," said the priest, going up to him. "You belong to me because you suffer. Unhappily, I come to increase your pain. Ursula had a terrible dream last night. Your uncle lifted the stone from his grave and came forth to prophesy a great disaster in your family. I certainly am not here to frighten you, but you ought to know what he said." "I can't be easy anywhere, Monsieur Chaperon, not even among these rocks, and I'm sure I don't want to know anything that is going on in another world." "Then I will leave you, monsieur. I did not take this hot walk for pleasure," said the abbé, mopping his forehead. "Well, what do you want to say?" demanded Minoret. "You are threatened with the loss of your son. If the dead man told things that you alone know, one must needs tremble when he tells things that no one can know till they happen. Make restitution, I say. Make restitution. Don't damn your soul for a little money."
"Restitution of what?"
"The fortune the doctor intended for Ursula. You took those 3 certificates. I know it now. You began by persecuting that poor girl, and you end by offering her a fortune. You have stumbled into lies. You have tangled yourself up in this net, and you are taking false steps every day. You are very clumsy and unskilful. Your accomplice, Goupil, has served you ill. He simply laughs at you. Make haste and clear your mind, for you are watched by intelligent and penetrating eyes, those of Ursula's friends. Make restitution, and if you do not save your son, who may not really be threatened, you will save your soul, and you will save your honor. Do you believe that in a society like ours, in a little town like this, where everybody's eyes are everywhere, and all things are guessed, and all things are known, you can long hide a stolen fortune? Come, my son, an innocent man wouldn't have let me talk so long."
"Go to the devil!" cried Minoret. "I don't know what you all mean by persecuting me. I prefer these stones. They leave me in peace."
"Farewell, then. I have warned you. Neither the poor girl nor I have said a single word about this to any living person. But take care. There is a man who has his eye upon you. May God have pity upon you." The abbé departed. Presently he turned back to look at Minoret. The man was holding his head in his hands as if it troubled him. He was, in fact, partly crazy. In the first place, he had kept the 3 certificates because he did not know what to do with them. He dared not draw the money himself for fear it should be noticed. He did not wish to sell them, and was still trying to find some way of transferring the certificates. In this horrible state of uncertainty, he bethought him of acknowledging all to his wife, and getting her advice. Zélie, who always managed affairs for him so well, she could get him out of his troubles. The 3% funds were now selling at 80. Restitution? Why, that meant, with arrearages, giving up $1 million. Give up $1 million? When there was no one who could know that he had taken it. So Minoret continued, through September and a part of October, irresolute and a prey to his torturing thoughts. To the great surprise of the little town, he grew thin and haggard. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Catherine Prescott Warmley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. Remorse. An alarming circumstance hastened the confession which Minoret was inclined to make to Zélie. The sword of Damocles began to move above their heads. Towards the middle of October, Monsieur and Madame Minoret received from their son Désiré the following letter. My dear mother, if I have not been to see you since vacation, it is partly because I have been on duty during the absence of my chief, but also because I knew that Monsieur de Portenduère was waiting my arrival at Nemours to pick a quarrel with me. Tired, perhaps, of seeing his vengeance on our family delayed, the Viscount came to Fontainebleau, where he had appointed one of his Parisian friends to meet him, having already obtained the help of the Vicomte de Soulanges, commanding the troop of cavalry here in garrison. He called upon me very politely, accompanied by the two gentlemen, and told me that my father was undoubtedly the instigator of the malignant persecutions against Ursula Mirouet, his future wife. He gave me proofs, and told me of Goupil's confession before witnesses. He also told me of my father's conduct, first in refusing to pay Goupil the price agreed on for his wicked invention, and next, out of fear of Goupil's malignity, going security to Monsieur Dionys for the price of his practice which Goupil is to have. The Viscount, not being able to fight a man of 67 years of age, and being determined to have satisfaction for the insults offered to Ursula, demanded it formally of me. His determination, having been well weighed and considered, could not be shaken. If I refused, he was resolved to meet me in society before persons whose esteem I value, and insult me openly. In France, a coward is unanimously scorned. Besides, the motives for demanding reparation should be explained by honorable men. He said he was sorry to resort to such extremities. His seconds declared it would be wiser in me to arrange a meeting in the usual manner among men of honor, so that Ursula Mirouet might not be known as the cause of the quarrel. To avoid all scandal, it was better to make a journey to the nearest frontier. In short, my seconds met his yesterday, and they unanimously agreed that I owed him reparation. A week from today I leave for Geneva with my two friends. Monsieur de Portenduère, Monsieur de Soulanges, and Monsieur de Troyes will meet me there. The preliminaries of the duel are settled. We shall fight with pistols. Each fires 3 times, and after that, no matter what happens, the affair terminates. To keep this degrading matter from public knowledge, for I find it impossible to justify my father's conduct, I do not go to see you now, because I dread the violence of the emotion to which you would yield, and which would not be seemly. If I am to make my way in the world, I must conform to the rules of society. If the son of a viscount has a dozen reasons for fighting a duel, the son of a postmaster has 100. I shall pass the night in Nemours on my way to Geneva, and I will bid you good-bye then. After the reading of this letter, a scene took place between Zélie and Minoret, which ended in the latter confessing the theft and relating all the circumstances and the strange scenes connected with it, even Ursula's dreams. The million fascinated Zélie quite as much as it did Minoret. "You stay quietly here," Zélie said to her husband, without the slightest remonstrance against his folly. "I'll manage the whole thing. We'll keep the money, and Désiré shall not fight a duel." Madame Minoret put on her bonnet and shawl, and carried her son's letter to Ursula, whom she found alone as it was about midday. In spite of her assurance, Zélie was discomfited by the cold look which the young girl gave her, but she took herself to task for her cowardice, and assumed an easy air. "Here, Mademoiselle Minoret, do me the kindness to read that, and tell me what you think of it," she cried, giving Ursula her son's letter. Ursula went through various conflicting emotions as she read the letter, which showed her how truly she was loved, and what care Savagnin took of the honour of the woman who was to be his wife. But she had too much charity and true religion to be willing to be the cause of death or suffering to her most cruel enemy. "I promise, madame, to prevent the duel. You may feel perfectly easy. But I must request you to leave me this letter." "My dear little angel, can we not come to some better arrangement? Monsieur Minoret and I have acquired property about Rouvres, a really regal castle, which gives us 48,000 francs a year. We shall give Désiré 24,000 a year, which we have in the funds. In all, 70,000 francs a year. You will admit that there are not many better matches than he. You are an ambitious girl, and quite right, too," added Zélie, seeing Ursula's quick gesture of denial. "I have therefore come to ask your hand for Désiré. You will bear your godfather's name, and that will honour it. Désiré, as you must have seen, is a handsome fellow. He is very much thought of at Fontainebleau, and he will soon be Procureur du Roi himself. You are a coaxing girl, and can easily persuade him to live in Paris. We will give you a fine house there. You will shine, you will play a distinguished part. For with 70,000 francs a year and the salary of an office, you and Désiré can enter the highest society. Consult your friends, you'll see what they tell you." "I need only consult my heart, madame." "Ta, ta, ta! Now don't talk to me about that little lady-killer Savagnin. You'd pay too high a price for his name, and for that little moustache curled up at the points like two hooks, and his black hair. How do you expect to manage on 7,000 francs a year with a man who made 200,000 francs of debt in 2 years? Besides, though this is a thing you don't know yet, all men are alike, and without flattering myself too much, I may say that my Désiré is the equal of a king's son." "You forget, madame, the danger your son is in at this moment, which can perhaps be averted only by Monsieur de Portenduer's desire to please me. If he knew that you had made me these unworthy proposals, that danger might not be escaped. Besides, let me tell you, madame, that I shall be far happier in the moderate circumstances to which you allude than I should be in the opulence with which you are trying to dazzle me. For reasons hitherto unknown, but which will yet be made known, Monsieur Minoret, by persecuting me in an odious manner, strengthened the affection that exists between Monsieur de Portenduer and myself, which I can now admit because his mother has blessed it. I will also tell you that this affection, sanctioned and legitimate, is life itself to me. No destiny, however brilliant, however lofty, could make me change. I love without the possibility of changing. It would therefore be a crime if I married a man to whom I could take nothing but a soul that is Savagnin's. But, madame, since you force me to be explicit, I must tell you that even if I did not love Monsieur de Portenduer, I could not bring myself to bear the troubles and joys of life in the company of your son. If Monsieur Savagnin made debts, you have often paid those of your son. Our characters have neither the similarities nor the differences which enable two persons to live together without bitterness. Perhaps I should not have towards him the forbearance a wife owes to her husband. I should then be a trial to him. Pray cease to think of an alliance of which I count myself quite unworthy, and which I feel I can decline without pain to you, for with the great advantages you name to me, you cannot fail to find some girl of better station, more wealth, and more beauty than mine." "Will you swear to me," said Zélie, "to prevent these young men from taking that journey and fighting that duel?" "It will be, I foresee, the greatest sacrifice that Monsieur de Portenduère can make to me, but I shall tell him that my bridal crown must have no blood upon it." "Well, I thank you, cousin, and I can only hope you will be happy." "And I, madame, sincerely wish that you may realize all your expectations for the future of your son." These words struck a chill to the heart of the mother, who suddenly remembered the predictions of Ursula's last dream. She stood still, her small eyes fixed on Ursula's face, so white, so pure, so beautiful in her mourning dress, for Ursula had risen, too, to hasten her so-called cousin's departure. "Do you believe in dreams?" said Zélie. "I suffer from them too much not to do so." "But if you do—" began Zélie. "Adieu, madame," exclaimed Ursula, bowing to Madame Minoret as she heard the Abbé's entering step. The priest was surprised to find Madame Minoret with Ursula. The uneasiness depicted on the thin and wrinkled face of the former postmistress induced him to take note of the two women. "Do you believe in spirits?" Zélie asked him. "What do you believe in?" he answered, smiling. "They are all sly," thought Zélie, "every one of them. They want to deceive us. That old priest and the old justice and that young scamp Savagnin have got some plan in their heads. Dreams! No more dreams than there are hairs on the palm of my hand." With two stiff, curt bows, she left the room. "I know why Savagnin went to Fontainebleau," said Ursula to the Abbé, telling him about the duel, and begging him to use his influence to prevent it. "Did Madame Minoret offer you her son's hand?" asked the Abbé. "Yes." "Minoret has no doubt confessed his crime to her," added the priest. Monsieur Bongrand, who came in at this moment, was told of the step taken by Zélie, whose hatred to Ursula was well known to him. He looked at the Abbé as if to say, "Come out, I want to speak to you of Ursula without her hearing me." "Savagnin must be told that you refused 80,000 francs a year and the dandy of Nemours," he said aloud. "Is it then a sacrifice?" she answered, laughing. "Are there sacrifices when one truly loves? Is it any merit to refuse the son of a man we all despise? Others may make virtues of their dislikes, but that ought not to be the morality of a girl brought up by a de Jordy and the Abbé and my dear godfather," she said, looking up at his portrait. Bongrand took Ursula's hand and kissed it. "Do you know what Madame Minoret came about?" said the justice as soon as they were in the street. "What?" asked the priest, looking at Bongrand with an air that seemed merely curious. "She had some plan for restitution." "Then you think—" began the Abbé. "I don't think, I know. I have the certainty, and see, there." So saying, Bongrand pointed to Minoret, who was coming towards them on his way home. "When I was a lawyer in the criminal courts," continued Bongrand, "I naturally had many opportunities to study remorse, but I have never seen any to equal that of this man. What gives him that flaccidity, that pallor of the cheeks where the skin was once as tight as a drum, and bursting with the good sound health of a man without a care? What has put those black circles round his eyes, and dulled their rustic vivacity? Did you ever expect to see lines of care on that forehead? Who would have supposed that the brain of that colossus could be excited? The man has felt his heart. I am a judge of remorse, just as you are a judge of repentance, my dear Abbé. That which I have hitherto observed has developed in men who were awaiting punishment, or enduring it to get quits with the world. They were either resigned or breathing vengeance. But here is remorse without expiation, remorse pure and simple, fastening on its prey and rending him." The judge stopped Minoret and said, "Do you know that Mademoiselle Minoret has refused your son's hand?" "But," interposed the Abbé, "do not be uneasy. She will prevent the duel." "Ah, then my wife succeeded," said Minoret. "I am very glad, for it nearly killed me." "You are indeed so changed that you are no longer like yourself," remarked Bongrand. Minoret looked alternately at the two men to see if the priest had betrayed the dreams, but the Abbé's face was unmoved, expressing only a calm sadness which reassured the guilty man. "And it is the more surprising," went on Monsieur Bongrand, "because you ought to be filled with satisfaction. You are Lord of Rouvre and all those farms and mills and meadows, and with your investments in the funds you have an income of 100,000 francs." "I haven't anything in the funds," cried Minoret hastily. "Pooh!" said Bongrand. "This is just as it was about your son's love for Ursula. First he denied it, and now he asks her in marriage? After trying to kill Ursula with sorrow, you now want her for a daughter-in-law? My good friend, you have got some secret in your pouch." Minoret tried to answer. He searched for words and could find nothing better than, "You're very queer, monsieur. Good day, gentlemen." And he turned with a slow step into the Rue des Bourgeois. "He has stolen the fortune of our poor Ursula," said Bongrand. "But how can we ever find the proof?" "God may—" "God has put into us the sentiment that is now appealing to that man. But all that is merely what is called presumptive, and human justice requires something more." The Abbé maintained the silence of a priest. As often happens in similar circumstances, he thought much oftener than he wished to think of the robbery, now almost admitted by Minoret, and of Savigny's happiness, delayed only by Ursula's loss of fortune. For the old lady had privately owned to him that she knew she had done wrong in not consenting to the marriage in the doctor's lifetime. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. Showing how difficult it is to steal that which seems very easily stolen. The following day, as the Abbé was leaving the altar after saying Mass, A thought struck him with such force that it seemed to him the utterance of a voice. He made a sign to Ursula to wait for him, and accompanied her home without having breakfasted. "My child," he said, "I want to see the 2 volumes your godfather showed you in your dreams, where he said that he placed those certificates and banknotes." Ursula and the abbe went up to the library and took down the 3rd volume of the Pandects. When the old man opened it, he noticed, not without surprise, a mark left by some enclosure upon the pages, which still kept the outline of the certificate. In the other volume he found a sort of hollow made by the long-continued presence of a package, which had left its traces on the 2 pages next to it. "Yes, go up, Monsieur Bongrand," La Bougival was heard to say, and the justice of the peace came into the library just as the abbe was putting on his spectacles to read 3 numbers in Dr. Minoret's handwriting on the fly-leaf of colored paper with which the binder had lined the cover of the volume, figures which Ursula had just discovered. "What's the meaning of those figures?" said the abbe. "Our dear doctor was too much of a bibliophile to spoil the fly-leaf of a valuable volume. Here are 3 numbers written between a first number preceded by the letter M and a last number preceded by a U." "What are you talking of?" said Bongrand. "Let me see that." "Good God!" he cried after a moment's examination. "It would open the eyes of an atheist as an actual demonstration of Providence. Human justice is, I believe, the development of the divine thought which hovers over the worlds." He seized Ursula and kissed her forehead. "Oh, my child, you will be rich and happy, and all through me." "What is it?" exclaimed the abbe. "Oh, monsieur," cried La Bougival, catching Bongrand's blue overcoat, "let me kiss you for what you've just said." "Explain, explain! Don't give us false hopes," said the abbe. "If I bring trouble on others by becoming rich," said Ursula, foreseeing a criminal trial, "I—" "Remember," said the justice, interrupting her, "the happiness you will give to Savigny." "Are you mad?" said the abbe. "No, my dear friend," said Bongrand. "Listen. The certificates in the funds are issued in series, as many series as there are letters in the alphabet, and each number bears the letter of its series. But the certificates which are made out to bearer cannot have a letter. They are not in any person's name. What you see there shows that the day the doctor placed his money in the funds, he noted down, first, the number of his own certificate for 15,000 francs interest, which bears his initial, M. Next, the numbers of 3 inscriptions to bearer. These are without a letter. And thirdly, the certificate of Ursula's share in the funds, the number of which is 23534, and which follows, as you see, that of the 15,000 franc certificate with lettering. This goes far to prove that those numbers are those of 5 certificates of investments made on the same day and noted down by the doctor in case of loss. I advised him to take certificates to bearer for Ursula's fortune, and he must have made his own investment and that of Ursula's little property the same day. I'll go to Dionys's office and look at the inventory. If the number of the certificate for his own investment is 23533, letter M, we may be sure that he invested through the same broker on the same day, first, his own property on a single certificate, secondly, his savings in 3 certificates to bearer, numbered but without the series letter, thirdly, Ursula's own property. The transfer books will show, of course, undeniable proofs of this. Ah, Minoret, you deceiver, I have you. Motus, my children." Whereupon he left them abruptly to reflect with admiration on the ways by which Providence had brought the innocent to victory. "The finger of God is in all this," cried the Abbé. "Will they punish him?" asked Ursula. "Ah, mademoiselle," cried la Bougival, "I'd give the rope to hang him." Bongrand was already at Goupil's, now the appointed successor of Dionys, but he entered the office with a careless air. "I have a little matter to verify about the Minoret property," he said to Goupil. "What is it?" asked the latter. "The doctor left one or more certificates in the 3% funds." "He left one for 15,000 francs a year," said Goupil. "I recorded it myself." "Then just look on the inventory," said Bongrand. Goupil took down a box, hunted through it, drew out a paper, found the place, and read. "Item, one certificate. Here, read for yourself, under the number 23533, letter M." "Do me the kindness to let me have a copy of that clause within an hour," said Bongrand. "What good is it to you?" asked Goupil. "Do you want to be a notary?" answered the justice of peace, looking sternly at Dionys's proposed successor. "Of course I do," cried Goupil. "I've swallowed too many affronts not to succeed now. I beg you to believe, monsieur, that the miserable creature once called Goupil has nothing in common with Maître Jean-Sébastien Marie Goupil, notary of Nemours, and husband of Mademoiselle Massin. The two beings do not know each other. They are no longer even alike. Look at me." Thus adjured, Monsieur Bongrand took notice of Goupil's clothes. The new notary wore a white cravat, a shirt of dazzling whiteness adorned with ruby buttons, a waistcoat of red velvet, with trousers and coat of handsome black broadcloth, made in Paris. His boots were neat, his hair carefully combed was perfumed. In short, he was metamorphosed. "The fact is, you are another man," said Bongrand. "Morally as well as physically. Virtue comes with practice. A practice. Besides, money is the source of cleanliness." "Morally as well as physically," returned Bongrand, settling his spectacles. "Ah, monsieur, is a man worth 100,000 francs a year ever a democrat? Consider me in future as an honest man who knows what refinement is, and who intends to love his wife," said Goupil. "And what's more, I shall prevent my clients from ever doing dirty actions." "Well, make haste," said Bongrand. "Let me have that copy in an hour, and Notary Goupil will have undone some of the evil deeds of Goupil the clerk." After asking the Nemours doctor to lend him his horse and cabriolet, he went back to Ursula's house for the two important volumes and for her own certificate of funds. Then, armed with the extract from the inventory, he drove to Fontainebleau and had an interview with the Procureur du Roi. Bongrand easily convinced that official of the theft of the 3 certificates by one or other of the heirs, presumably by Minoret. "His conduct is explained," said the Procureur. As a measure of precaution, the magistrate at once notified the Treasury to withhold transfer of the said certificates, and told Bongrand to go to Paris and ascertain if the shares had ever been sold. He then wrote a polite note to Madame Minoret, requesting her presence. Zélie, very uneasy about her son's duel, dressed herself at once, had the horses put to her carriage, and hurried to Fontainebleau. The procureur's plan was simple enough. By separating the wife from the husband, and bringing the terrors of the law to bear upon her, he expected to learn the truth. Zélie found the official in his private office, and was utterly annihilated when he addressed her as follows. "Madame," he said, "I do not believe you are an accomplice in a theft that has been committed upon the Minoret property, on the track of which the law is now proceeding. But you can spare your husband the shame of appearing in the prisoner's dock by making a full confession of what you know about it. The punishment which your husband has incurred is, moreover, not the only thing to be dreaded. Your son's career is to be thought of. You must avoid destroying that. Half an hour hence will be too late. The police are already under orders for Nemours. The warrant is made out." Zélie nearly fainted. When she recovered her senses, she confessed everything. After proving to her that she was, in point of fact, an accomplice, the magistrate told her that if she did not wish to injure either son or husband, she must behave with the utmost prudence. "You have now to do with me as an individual, not as a magistrate," he said. "No complaint has been lodged by the victim, nor has any publicity been given to the theft. But your husband has committed a great crime, which may be brought before a judge less inclined than myself to be considerate. In the present state of the affair, I am obliged to make you a prisoner, in my own house, on parole," he added, seeing that Zélie was about to faint. "You must remember that my official duty would require me to issue a warrant at once and begin an examination, but I am acting now individually as guardian of Mademoiselle Ursula Mirouet, and her best interests demand a compromise." "Ah!" exclaimed Zélie. "Write to your husband in the following words," he continued, placing Zélie at his desk and proceeding to dictate the letter. "My friend, I am arrested, and I have told all. Return the certificates which uncle left to Monsieur de Portenduère in the will which you burned, for the Procureur du Roi has stopped payment at the Treasury." "You will thus save him from the denials he would otherwise attempt to make," said the magistrate, smiling at Zélie's orthography. "We will see that the restitution is properly made. My wife will make your stay in our house as agreeable as possible. I advise you to say nothing of the matter, and not to appear anxious or unhappy." Now that Zélie had confessed and was safely immured, the magistrate sent for Désiré, told him all the particulars of his father's theft, which was really to Ursula's injury, but as matters stood, legally to that of his co-heirs, and showed him the letter written by his mother. Désiré at once asked to be allowed to go to Nemours and see that his father made immediate restitution. "It is a very serious matter," said the magistrate. "The will having been destroyed, if the matter gets wind, the co-heirs, Massin and Coimière, may put in a claim. I have proof enough against your father. I will release your mother, for I think the little ceremony that has already taken place has been sufficient warning as to her duty. To her I will seem to have yielded to your entreaties in releasing her. Take her with you to Nemours, and manage the whole matter as best you can. Don't fear anyone. Monsieur Bongrand loves Ursula Mirouet too well to let the matter become known." Zélie and Désirée started soon after for Nemours. 3 hours later, the Procureur du Roi received, by a mounted messenger, the following letter, the orthography of which has been corrected so as not to bring ridicule on a man crushed by affliction. To Monsieur le Procureur du Roi at Fontainebleau. Monsieur, God is less kind to us than you. We have met with an irreparable misfortune. When my wife and son reached the bridge at Nemours, a trace became unhooked. There was no servant behind the carriage. The horses smelt the stable. My son, fearing their impatience, jumped down to hook the trace rather than have the coachman leave the box. As he turned to resume his place in the carriage beside his mother, the horses started. Désirée did not step back against the parapet in time. The step of the carriage cut through both legs, and he fell, the hind wheel passing over his body. The messenger who goes to Paris for the best surgeon will bring you this letter, which my son in the midst of his sufferings desires me to write, so as to let you know our entire submission to your decisions in the matter about which he was coming to speak to me. I shall be grateful to you to my dying day for the manner in which you have acted, and I will deserve your goodness. François Minoret. The cruel event convulsed the whole town of Nemours. The crowds standing about the gate of the Minoret house were the first to tell Savagnin that his vengeance had been taken by a hand more powerful than his own. He went at once to Ursula's house, where he found both the abbé and the young girl more distressed than surprised. The next day, after the wounds were dressed and the doctors and surgeons from Paris had given their opinion that both legs must be amputated, Minoret went, pale, humbled, and broken down, accompanied by the abbé, to Ursula's house, where he found also Monsieur Bongrand and Savagnin. "Mademoiselle," he said, "I am very guilty towards you. But if all the wrongs I have done you are not wholly reparable, there are some that I can expiate. My wife and I have made a vow to make over to you in absolute possession our estate at Rouvre, in case our son recovers, and also in case we have the dreadful sorrow of losing him." He burst into tears as he said the last words. "I can assure you, my dear Ursula," said the abbé, "that you can and that you ought to accept a part of this gift." "Will you forgive me?" said Minoret, humbly kneeling before the astonished girl. "The operation is about to be performed by the first surgeon of the Hôtel Dieu, but I do not trust to human science. I rely only on the power of God. If you will forgive us, if you ask God to restore our son to us, he will have strength to bear the agony, and we shall have the joy of saving him." "Let us go to the church," cried Ursula, rising. But as she gained her feet, a piercing cry came from her lips, and she fell backward, fainting. When her senses returned, she saw her friends, but not Minoret, who had rushed for a doctor, looking at her with anxious eyes, seeking an explanation. As she gave it, terror filled their hearts. "I saw my godfather standing in the doorway," she said, "and he signed to me that there was no hope." The day after the operation, Désirée died, carried off by the fever and the shock to the system that succeed operations of this nature. Madame Minoret, whose heart had no other tender feeling than maternity, became insane after the burial of her son, and was taken by her husband to the establishment of Dr. Blanche, where she died in 1841. 3 months after these events, in January 1837, Ursula married Savagnin with Madame de Portenduer's consent. Minoret took part in the marriage contract and insisted on giving Mademoiselle Mirouet his estate at Rouvres and an income of 24,000 francs from the funds, keeping for himself only his uncle's house and 10,000 francs a year. He has become the most charitable of men, and the most religious. He is churchwarden of the parish, and has made himself the providence of the unfortunate. "The poor take the place of my son," he said. If you have ever noticed by the wayside, in countries where they pole the oaks, some old tree, whitened and as if blasted, still throwing out its twigs, though its trunk is riven and seems to implore the axe, you will have an idea of the old postmaster with his white hair, broken, emaciated, in whom the elders of the town can see no trace of the jovial dullard whom you first saw watching for his son at the beginning of this history. He does not even take his snuff as he once did. He carries something more now than the weight of his body. Beholding him, we feel that the hand of God was laid upon that figure to make it an awful warning. After hating so violently his uncle's godchild, the old man now, like Dr. Minoret himself, has concentrated all his affections on her, and has made himself the manager of her property in Nemours. Monsieur and Madame de Portenduer pass 5 months of the year in Paris, where they have bought a handsome house in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. Madame de Portenduer the elder, after giving her house in Nemours to the Sisters of Charity for a free school, went to live at Rouvres, where La Bougival keeps the porter's lodge. Cabirol, the former conductor of the Duclair, a man 60 years of age, has married La Bougival, and the 1,200 francs a year which she possesses, besides the ample emoluments of her place. Young Cabirol is Monsieur de Portenduer's coachman. If you happen to see in the Champs-Élysées one of those charming little low carriages called escargots, lined with grey silk and trimmed with blue, and containing a pretty young woman whom you admire because her face is wreathed in innumerable fair curls, her eyes luminous as forget-me-nots and filled with love, if you see her bending slightly towards a fine young man, and if you are for a moment conscious of envy, pause and reflect that this handsome couple, beloved of God, have paid their quota to the sorrows of life in times now past. These married lovers are the Vicomte de Portenduer and his wife. There is not another such home in Paris as theirs. "It is the sweetest happiness I have ever seen," said the Comtesse de l'Estorade, speaking of them lately. Bless them, therefore, and be not envious. Seek an Ursula for yourselves, a young girl brought up by 3 old men, and by the best of all mothers, adversity. Goupil, who does service to everybody and is justly considered the wittiest man in Nemours, has won the esteem of the little town, but he is punished in his children, who are rickety and hydrocephalous. Dionys, his predecessor, flourishes in the Chamber of Deputies, of which he is one of the finest ornaments, to the great satisfaction of the King of the French, who sees Madame Dionys at all his balls. Madame Dionys relates to the whole town of Nemours the particulars of her receptions at the Tuileries, and the splendor of the court of the King of the French. She lords it over Nemours by means of the throne, which therefore must be popular in the little town. Bongrand is Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals at Melun. His son is in the way of becoming an honest Attorney General. Madame Crémière continues to make her delightful speeches. On the occasion of her daughter's marriage, she exhorted her to be the working caterpillar of the household, and to look into everything with the eyes of a sphinx. Goupil is making a collection of her slapsoulinki, which he calls Crémiériana. We have had the great sorrow of losing our good Abbé Chaperon, said the Vicomtesse de Portenduère this winter, having nursed him herself during his illness. The whole canton came to his funeral. Nemours is very fortunate, however, for the successor of that dear saint is the venerable curé of Saint-Lange. End of chapter 21. End of Ursula by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley.